Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto gets female Ben 10 pregnant. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Naruto groaned in pain as he woke up. He felt a familiar pain in his shoulder as he slowly managed to open his eyes. He looked around for a few minutes before he began to recognize the familiar sterilized white walls and ceiling of the hospital. Naruto groaned in annoyance as he fell backwards onto the bed, wincing slightly as he remembered the familiar technique that had injured him. Naruto laid down and just stared up at the ceiling. The only noise he heard was the sound of his own breathing and the heart monitor that had been hooked up to him. With nothing else to do, the blonde began to think back on his life. He frowned as he remembered his early life. Naruto's unwillingly being made to be the jail of the nine-tailed fox, or the Kyuubi as they called it. His early years being ignored by the matron of the orphanage and his fellow orphans on her words. He remembered being kicked out when he turned 8, and being given an old apartment in the red light district. He remembered how he learned all the nooks and crannies, all the good places to hide in case certain villagers got crazy. A small smile came to the blonde's face as he remembered the drunks, prostitutes, and other members of the red light district who didn't see him as a monster, but someone who had just been given a seriously bad hand, like many of them had. He remembered how they would help hide him when people were hunting him. He remembered his later years in the ninja academy, how he was purposely left out of certain lessons, or given bad advice from teachers, and how everyone would laugh and mock him for his lack of skill, or even just for being lesser than them. How he adopted the mask of an idiot to hide his pain, to keep some people off his back. He remembered his first ninja team, Team 7, consisting of him, the Rookie of the Year, Sasuke Uchiha, the Kunoichi of the Year, Sakura Haruno, and Kakashi Hatake. Another frown came to his face as he remembered how Sasuke and Sakura would mock him, and how Kakashi would turn a blind eye. He remembered how the D-ranked customers would make it harder for him, while singing Haruno and Uchiha's praises. He scowled angrily as he remembered how Kakashi would always go against his own words and train Sasuke privately, leaving him and Sakura alone. He remembered his first real mission, where he gained his first real friend in Haku, who had a similar past to his own, hated for something that wasn't in his control. How he died to save a man who gave him a purpose to live. He remembered the Chunin exams where he would blow away everyone's expectations of him failing in the first round. How he met with the old perverted sage, Jiraiya. The whiskered blonde let out a small laugh as he remembered how he knocked out Ebisu, the closet pervert, with one move, and how easy it was get him to agree to train him. He smirked as he remembered the sense of pride he felt when he learned the Rasengan and earned the right to summon the toads. The sense of pride grew as he remembered how he defeated Gaara, the holder of the one-tailed beast, and Neji, the former Rookie of the Year, and prodigy of the Hyuga clan. His smile was replaced with a scowl as he remembered how Sasuke, the village golden boy, had run away from the village, the mission almost resulting in the death of Neji, Choji, Kiba, and Akamaru. How Kakashi and Sakura looked at him with disappointment when they learned the mission failed, as if the whole thing was all his fault. He remembered the feeling of joy he felt when Jiraiya took Naruto out of the village to train him. He remembered the anger he felt when Jiraiya told him of his parentage, that his father was the fourth Hokage and that he was his godfather. He also remembered the shock and outrage on Jiraiya's face when he told the Toad Sage of his life. Apparently, the Sandaime wasn't as good as he thought he was. He told Jiraiya lies of how Naruto was adopted and under the care of a loving family. He remembered the blood, sweat, and tears that went into the following 3 years that followed. How he learned taijutsu, ninjutsu, the various variant version of the Rasengan, picking up on his stealth skills, and learning to become a better ninja. He remembered running into retired ninja who he met and gained the trust of, learning things from them that he couldn't learn from Jiraiya, specifically elemental affinities and a sensor ability. He also remembered the day a slug, sent by Tsunade, dropped off a scroll detailing a specific chakra exercise that allowed him access to copy or super strength. He remembered how he returned to Konoha and how so many people seemed to have changed. He also remembered the disgust he felt for some of the people there. Then he remembered how he managed to get in this position. Team 7, reunited after Naruto's training trip, were sent out on a mission of their own to one of Orochimaru's bases to find Sasuke, after leaving the village in pursuit of the power he believed was necessary for killing his elder brother and avenging his clan. After arriving at the base, Naruto, Sakura, their new teammate Sai, and Kakashi were separated. Naruto found himself facing off against Sasuke alone. Sasuke, full of himself, mocked Naruto, saying that he could have Bene training instead of wasting his time attempting to bring him back to Konoha. Naruto's response was to get into a stance. The two were evenly matched. Naruto's personalized frog kata, going toe-to-toe with Sasuke's family interceptor style. As for jutsu, Naruto managed to match any fire and lightning jutsu Sasuke used with a mix of wind and water style respectively. It all came to head when Sasuke activated his curse seal and went into the second state. The boy then proceeded to mock and gloat, going on and on about how with this, he was far superior to anyone from Konoha and that he would finally fulfill his ambition. It was during that time that Naruto began to tap into the Kyuubi's chakra to even the playing field. The brawl continued for a little bit and then ended again in a similar way to their clash at the Valley of the End. Sasuke, in the middle of their initial attack, took out a lightning chakra-infused sword and stabbed the blonde in the shoulder. This time, however, Naruto's Kyuubi enhanced Rasengan plowed through Sasuke's and slammed him in the chest. The technique cracked some ribs and sent the Uchiha flying into the opposite wall and straight into the realm of unconsciousness. Naruto smiled to himself as he remembered the look of shock on Sasuke's face when he was taken down. Finally, he had beaten Sasuke and proven himself no longer the dead last of his generation. Naruto was drawn from his memories and feeling of victory by a familiar rumble getting his attention. He glanced down at his stomach and mentally cursed his large appetite and where he was. Naruto had always hated hospital food. With little thought, Naruto formed a shadow clone and then sent him out to Ichiruka's to get some ramen. Naruto quickly laid back down and began to relax. Little did the boy know, his entire life was about to change. A few moments later, Ichiruka ramen stand. Naruto's clone grinned as he paid for his ramen and immediately began make his way back to the hospital. As he moved all around him, he heard various whispers around him. "It's him. What's he doing out of the hospital? Did he heal that quickly? Should have just put him out of our misery is what we should have done. I heard that he nearly killed the Uchiha heir. We should take him down now, before he tries to kill someone else." The clone ignored the whispers of the bigots. Wanting to get the ramen to the boss faster, he jumped up and started to run across the rooftops for the hospital. After a few minutes, the clone had the hospital in sight when he noticed something off. Looking down, he saw a familiar trio of people. He immediately recognized the three as Danzo, Homura, and Koharu, the three advisors to the Hokage, in this case Tsunade. Naruto's clone immediately felt alarm bells go off in his head. He barely saw the three together unless they meant business. Given the fact that they were currently speaking to each other outside of the cage tower, meant that something big was going down. Naruto didn't know what was going on, but he immediately ran down to keep an eye on them, leaving the wrapped ramen hidden, in case they managed to catch a whiff of it. The three advisors walked down the street and arrived at a small house. Upon seeing them enter, Naruto's clone quickly went to a window a floor above them, and then quickly entered, before anyone could notice him. Pulling pranks on Jonin and Anbu really had its advantages. The clone then entered the home and quickly began to navigate the home. He stepped lightly to avoid stepping on any loose boards and making any unnecessary noise. Naruto soon found a flight of stairs going downstairs. He quickly stopped near the base of the stairs. He saw the trio of advisors sitting at the table with a familiar man. The man had familiar pink hair done up in a star style with a mustache and, despite his darker skin tone, he could easily tell that this man was related to his teammate, Sakura Haruno. Kazashi, if what he heard was right. "So, is everything ready?" Kazashi asked the trio. "Yes," Koharu answered, nodding her head, "the report is already on its way to the daimyo." "What about everything on your end?" Kazashi smirked and said, "Being on the council has its advantages. The mission reports have been corrected and the medical reports have all been placed. All we have to do now is sit back and wait for everything to hit the fan." Homura nodded and said, "You have done well, Kazashi." Kazashi nodded and said, "Thank you. Now as for what I was promised." Koharu sighed and said, "The engagement between your daughter and Sasuke will go through." Your family will have full access to the Uchiha bank accounts, and the political power that will come with it. Kazashi smiled and said, "Good. My daughter will get her dream boy, I'll be rich, and the demon brat will be sent away. I must ask though, what happens to the boy afterwards? He is supposed to be the village's weapon after all." Danzo nodded and said, "My men will intercept him as he is taken away. After that, all it will take is a little nudge in the right direction and the boy will be our tool like he should have been years ago." Damn, Sarutobi and his bleeding heart. Naruto's clone gritted his teeth as he heard this. The blonde then slipped back out of the house, undetected, and quickly grabbed the ramen and proceeded to rush towards the hospital. The boss was going to be pissed. Danzo glanced towards the corner and could have sworn that he saw a glance of orange, but immediately dismissed the idea. Maybe he should pay a visit to the eye doctor later. The future Hokage couldn't have his eyes failing. At the hospital a few minutes later, Naruto turned towards the window as his clone returned from his ramen run. "Thanks man," he said with a smile, "you're a lifesaver." Naruto downed the ramen rather lowly, as opposed to his normal eating pace, that being wolf as much down as you can in a few minutes. As he slurped down the last of the broth in his bowl, Naruto let out a sigh of satisfaction, having been able to enjoy his favorite food. Naruto set his bowl to the side and leaned back in bed, ready to take another nap, but stopped when he saw that his clone hadn't dispersed yet. The blonde's gut immediately told him that something bad was going on. "Did something happen?" he asked. The clone simply sighed before exploding into a puff of white smoke. Immediately, Naruto's mind was assaulted by the clone's memories. This included being on the receiving end of a lot of glares from civilians, being greeted by old man Tuichi and his daughter, paying for his ramen, seeing Danzo and the old fossils, and the ensuing meeting between them and Kazashi. As the memories faded, Naruto let out a growl. He always knew that the council and their like had it out for him. He should have known that they would pull something like this would happen after he got the village prince back. He knew that if it was Tsunade in charge, she would see the prick punished for abandonment. These guys, however, apparently were invested in the Uchiha's Sharingan and repopulating it. After a few moments, the blonde began to calm down and think. The mention of changed medical reports and mission reports had the blonde worried. If the council had changed those, most likely they would portray him as a nuisance and hindrance while praising his team. Another thing that got his attention was the mention of the daimyo. The Hokage title was the most prestigious title in the village, but the daimyo was someone even Granny would have to listen to. If he knew the villagers, they would jump at the chance to have him thrown out of the village and out of their hair. Naruto let out a sigh as he got up from the bed. It looked like he was going to have to head out of Konoha after all. He would have to make sure to get a message to the old pervert when he got to a safe place. Naruto quickly made his way to a small stack of clothes, threw them on, leaving behind his headband, and swiftly made his way out of the hospital. Naruto, as quickly and stealthily as possible, made his way to his apartment. The blonde ninja, soon to be former, quickly went through his items. He grabbed the basics, being a change of clothes, a sleeping bag, a medical kit, and some special food pills. He also made sure to empty out the jar of money he had saved up from various missions he had saved up. He called it the "Get the Hell Out of Dodge Fund," jokingly of course, but now it seemed a lot more appropriate. As far as equipment, he grabbed his old green goggles, some spare kunai and shuriken, and a roll of ninja wire. He also managed to grab a few explosive notes, flash bombs, smoke bombs, and a small pack of caltrops. Naruto quickly sealed all his tools and equipment in various small scrolls that he could hide under his jacket. Naruto was about to leave when he noticed something. He remembered it as a box of some of his old pranking supplies. There were stink bombs, paint bombs, fake vomit, real vomit, don't ask, fake dog poo, and other basic jokes and gags. Naruto grinned as a familiar glint filled his eyes. If any of his old pranking victims had seen him, they would have become extremely nervous. He quickly grabbed some of the stink bombs and paint bombs, leaving behind some of the grosser pranks, as he knew they wouldn't help him. Adjusting his goggles on his head, he shot off and made his way to the village wall. Quickly and stealthily, the blonde made his way towards the main wall, with nobody noticing. Some looked up at the occasional sound of a roof tile moving slightly, but dismissed it as just a bird moving on the ceilings. After a few minutes, the boy reached the village wall. With no one around, the blonde was quickly able to get over the wall without anyone noticing. Meanwhile, beyond the planet's atmosphere, from above the ninja world, the planet would look very similar to another human-populated world. The planet held blue oceans, with various areas of brown, green, and white all visible from the atmosphere. As opposed to the different landmass consisted of 7 continents, the land on this planet had only one giant landmass, like the prehistoric supercontinent of Pangaea. Slowly, the view pans to show a large dome sitting in the dark side of the moon. The dome appeared to be about the size of a baseball stadium and covered in tinted glass. The glass-like substance was a special polymer that was made to reflect the radiation from the sun, to keep the people inside from frying. The dome seemed to have a large metal ring on the bottom of it, with large rings digging into the rock, keeping it anchored. Inside the dome, a figure is seen sitting at a chair. We see a large hand, with 3 fingers and a thumb, typing away at floating dark blue keyboard, with a dark blue holographic screen floating above it. On the screen in front of him you could see numbers, letters, and symbols of all kinds, going by at such a fast pace, you'd be amazed the person typing could keep up. Above the screen he was looking at were various people all over the world below. Images of deserts, mountain, shores, seas, and various people. Suddenly, a dark blue circle with a white exclamation mark appeared on the screen, getting his attention. The figure hummed in interest, before pressing his finger into the circle. The image of Naruto going over the village wall. The figure hummed again, moving his hand to rub his chin. After a moment of deliberation, he spoke. "Caretaker," he spoke, "what is the current situation of subject Naruto Uzumaki?" There was beeping noise when a computerized female voice spoke. Subject Naruto Uzumaki is currently a half a mile from the village of Konoha. Scan reveals a set amount of survival supplies, as well as tools and gear. A lack of a member of Jonin level ninja or his team, as well as he no longer wears his headband. There is a 97.661% chance that he is abandoning the village. Current destination unknown. The figure nodded. It was highly likely that the boy had gotten tired of the treatment those lower lifeforms. Why is it that whenever a person of that low intelligence they react with anger and fear? It was understandable at time, but at moments like this it just caused some unnecessary problems. The figure then responded, "What about the village itself? Are they aware of his leaving?" The computerized voice responded, scanning. The screen cycled through various images, all of them various areas of Konoha. The hot springs, the academy, and various other areas before it came across the hospital main area. There was the image of Danzo and the 2 elders speaking with the various members of the remaining Rookie 12. What is he saying? A nurse apparently found subject Naruto Uzumaki's hospital room and told her superiors, who then told Danzo, who had just arrived. He apparently expected Naruto to attempt to leave at some point. The figure cursed under his breath and said, "What about his comrades?" The computer let out a beeping noise and the screen showed various information, including the names of the ninja, heartbeats, brainwaves, blood pressure, and other various objects that would indicate a physical reaction. Apparently, Danzo has given an abridged version of what happened on subject Naruto Uzumaki's retrieval of Sasuke Uchiha, as well as his status as the 9-tailed fox's holder. According to scans of the various members of the group, rookies, Kiba Inuzuka, Sakura Haruno, Ino Yamanaka, and Neji Hyuga are all experiencing a fusion of anger and disbelief. There is a 85.256% chance this is due to Kiba and Neji's injured pride 3 years ago, and Sakura Haruno's and Ino Yamanaka's hormonal attraction to Sasuke Uchiha. Choji Akamichi, Rock Lee, Tenten, and Hinata Hyuga all experience disbelief. This is 87.528% likely due to Hinata's old affliction, Choji being out of the loop, Rock Lee's potential rivalry, and Tenten original indifference towards subject Naruto Uzumaki. Shikimaru Nara, Shino Aburame, and Sai Shimura all seem calm. This react is 87.265% likely, from the fact that they either knew of Naruto's affliction, or believed that something is not being told. The figure sighed. He could understand all their reactions. He idly wondered what the Academy was thinking when they implemented that dead last and Rookie of the Year crap. All it did was assign a label that everyone would hold over the dead last's head like it would mean anything. He had a prime example in that Jiraiya fellow. He was originally the dead last of his generation and now he was one of strongest warriors the village had, as well as a spy master. A sudden blaring of an alarm got the man's attention. He turned back to the screen and was shocked to see that the remaining members of the rookies were now heading out. Warning. Threat to subject Naruto Uzumaki imminent. Konoha Group. Rookies. Members have been dispatched by Danzo to retrieve subject Naruto Uzumaki. According to examinations of mental states, emotional states, there is a 75.236% chance that some may attempt to physically harm subject. The figure grumbled to himself, rubbing his chin in thought. What will happen if the subject is captured? The computer beeped, running through various numbers and computing various outcomes. After a few more moments it stopped and gave its answer. Probability of imprisonment, high. Probability of execution, medium. Probability of weaponization, high. The man slammed his fist down on the armchair with a grunt of frustration. If this happened, all the planning and work he had put into his project would go to waste. The boy was a one-of-a-kind, and probably the only person on the planet who seemed perfect for his experiment. He had hoped that he could wait a little bit longer before revealing himself to the boy, but now was as good a time as ever. Caretaker, he ordered, send down one of the drones. Only one. Put it in stealth mode, and it shall only intervene when it became necessary. Give it a non-lethal payload, but allow it to access the lethal payload if it comes to it. Acknowledged. Orders set and recognized. Sending drone now. Outside of the dome, a single figure can be seen moving through space. The figure approaches the planet below, turning red as it entered the atmosphere before it faded. The figure then sat back in the chair as the image changed to show Naruto running through the woods as fast as he could. Now, let the show begin. Back down on the planet, Naruto was continuing his run. After a minute of debate, all while running, he had decided the best place he could hide is in Snow Country, or Spring as it had been renamed. First, however, he had to make it to Wave Country. If his luck held true, Old Man Tazuna would help him reach the country. With a destination and a plan, albeit a very weak one, in mind, the now rogue shinobi ran as fast as he could. All the while making sure to keep his sensor abilities active. The blonde suddenly sensed a large amount of various chakra signatures heading in his direction. Naruto swiftly jumped into a nearby tree, hiding amongst the red-leaved leaf, and suppressing his chakra as much as possible. Within 3 minutes the remaining members of the rookies had arrived. Naruto quickly realized that simply hiding wouldn't cut it, especially with Kiba, Akamaru, Neji, Hinata, and Shino amongst the group, being expert trackers with the sense of smell, Byakugan, and Insect Hive respectively. Naruto calmly and slowly moved back out of the tree and began to move away, putting as much distance between the group and himself as possible. Damn, he thought, this could be a problem. It had been 3 years since Naruto had seen most of the members of the rookies. Almost of his information on them was outdated. The only members he knew about personally were Sakura and Sai. For the other members he had no idea about their current skill levels. He could make assumptions, but that could wind up making more problems than it would solve. This way, Naruto recognized the shout as Kiba's. Naruto continued to run through the trees until a barrage of kunai and shuriken slammed into a tree branch in front of him. Naruto stopped, and swift turned in the direction that the tools were thrown. The spiky-haired blonde saw Tenten standing on a branch twirling a kunai on her finger, clearly the source of the attack. Beside her were Lee and Neji. Apparently, they had managed to find him first, most likely to Neji's Byakugan. There was a moment of silence between the 3 Chunin and 1 Geni. Finally, the silence was broken by Lee. Naruto, my friend, please you must return with us to the village. Naruto simply scoffed and said, pray tell, why should I? Just so I can be arrested on trumped-up charges? No thank you. Lee responded, Naruto please. There must be some kind of mistake. If you come back with us, you can set the record straight. Naruto shook his head and said, I'm sorry Lee, but that isn't happening. I've had it with that village, and I do not plan on going back. Tenten tightened her grip on her kunai and Neji activated his Byakugan. Lee sighed and said, then please, forgive me for what I am about to do. Lee launched forward with his fist cocked back, quickly joined by his teammates. Lee was surprised when Naruto blocked the punch and countered with a punch to the solar plexus, knocking the air from the near chakra-less boy's lungs. Tenten and Neji both charged and stabbed their weapons and hands forward at the same time. Naruto dodged, pushing Lee out of the way and into a tree in the process, before pulling out a pair of kunai and blocking Tenten's assault. Neji attacked from the boy's side, only for the blonde to perform a quick substitution with Tenten. Neji was shocked when he found his attack striking his teammate instead of his opponent. Neji's danger sense went off as dodged a pair of kunai aimed at his shoulders. With Lee and Tenten temporarily disabled, Neji stood alone in his regular stance. He was shocked at the amount of skill Naruto had shown in just a few minutes. However, it would not deter him from completing his mission. "Give up now, Naruto. It is your fate to be defeated by us today." Naruto raised an eyebrow at Neji's words and asked, "I thought you were out of that phase." "Fate doesn't control everything, you know." Neji answered, "It does not matter to those who cannot rely on their own power." Naruto narrowed his eyes before getting into a basic stance of his own. One that Neji didn't seem to recognize. Neji launched forward and attacked with a few basic Jiyuken strikes, but it was blocked by the blonde. Dynamic entry. Naruto let out a cry of pain as he felt Lee's foot slam into his back. The boy was sent rolling as he was swiftly followed by the recovered Tenten. The bun-haired girl unsealed a staff which connected with the still recovering blonde's body and knocked him into a tree. "Damn it, there are too many trees. I need some room to move." Leaf whirlwind. Naruto was drawn from his thoughts just in time to see a barrage of low and high kicks sent his way. Replace himself with a log a good distance away. With that, a sudden rush of memories of one of his clones getting taken out by Kiba filled his mind. The blonde then swiftly got up and ran, with Team 9 in hot pursuit. After a few moments, Naruto came into a clearing of trees. Naruto stopped near the center of the clearing and waited. Leaf Great Whirlwind. Gentle Fist. Tenketsu Needle. The blonde swiftly dodged and parried a wave of low, mid, and high kicks from Lee and a single strike from Neji. As they were continuing to brawl, Tenten sat up in a tree a little bit away, hidden in the shadow of the leaves and branches, a bow and arrow in her hands. She took aim and waited for the right moment to strike. Seeing her opportunity, she fired. Naruto let out a cry of pain as the arrow entered his shoulder. He winced at the pain, but kept his head in the fight. The whiskered rogue ninja sent out a wave of wind chakra from his body, knocking the duo of fighting ninja off balance. Then, grabbing both of their heads, he slammed them together before throwing them off in different directions. Tenten launched out of a tree and shot forward, a sword unsealed and ready for use. Naruto responded quickly and focused some more of his wind chakra into his hand. With a swing of his arm, the wind chakra-wrapped hand struck the blade and sliced it clean into several pieces. Tenten's eyes widened before she got punched in the stomach. Tenten responded with a kick that Naruto blocked and countered with a kick of his own. The two grappled for a moment before the blonde brought his knee up into the girl's stomach with enough force to knock the girl into the air. In mid-air, Naruto grabbed her leg and threw her a good distance away. Neji and Lee, now recovered from getting knocked around, got up and were ready to attack. Naruto, realizing he had to end this quickly, pulled the arrow out of his shoulder with a grunt. Pulling another object of interest out of his pocket, Naruto pulled his goggles down over his eyes. "Look at the birdie." Naruto threw the object up into the air. The flash bomb went off, temporarily blinding the three, Neji especially with his Byakugan activated. Naruto quickly formed two clones and all three of them attacked the team. A barrage of punches to the chest and face knocked Neji on his butt, breaking his nose, cracking a couple of ribs, and blackening both of his eyes. Lee's attacker knocked him in the jaw, the temple, and then proceeded to dislocate his shoulder, then punch in the knees, overextending the joints, making him cry out in pain. Finally, Tenten received a mix of chakra-enhanced punches and kicks to the face and stomach. All three Chunin hit the ground out kid and in a good amount of pain. To end it, all three clones got up and stomped down on the three ninjas. The strikes were powerful enough to knock the three of them out. Naruto panted that had been a bit of a pain. Naruto quickly pulled out his medical kit and applied a bandage to his shoulder. He also took a solider pill just in case some of the others found him. Naruto was about to make a run for it, when he was suddenly aware of something rushing towards him. He dodged just in time for a familiar pair of spinning drills of fur to rush past him. Naruto turned and glared at Kiba and Akamaru as they came to a halt. Naruto suddenly turned towards the direction they came from to see the rest of the retrieval team standing there. "Naruto," Shikamaru called out, "you know you can't win against us. Just come back with us already, troublesome blonde." Before the boy could respond, Sakura decided to butt in. "Just give up now, Baka," she said, angrily, "you couldn't take me back when we were in the academy and you can't take all of us on now. Just give up and come back so you can get your punishment." Naruto glared at his former crush, having grown out of it a year into his training trip, and asked, "Why should I, Sakura? Why should I go back to be punished for completing the mission and bringing back that duck-haired traitor? I'm not going back to be brought up on trumped-up charges, while Sasuke gets a slap on the wrist." Sakura was about to say something, but Naruto cut her off. "If you say something about trying to kill Sasuke, then push those thoughts out of your dumb mountain-sized head, bimbo. You weren't there, so anything you have to say about what I did to Sasuke means absolutely nothing. I'm not going back to just be blamed for something that should have been done long ago, so the council can have its Sharingan and Sasuke can have his perfect record. If you want to take me back to Konoha, you're going to have to drag me back half dead." Sakura growled angrily and shot forward, her temper overriding her better judgment. She drew back her arm and was ready to slam her fist into the blonde's face. She had done this so many times, and was assured of her own superiority over the boy, that she was shocked beyond all words when Naruto held up a hand and caught her fist. Naruto stared at his former teammate and former crush as he tightened his grip on her fist. Sakura, not entirely used to being in pain, fell to one knee as she felt the bones in her hand grind together. "And to think, I used to find that forehead of yours charming." Sakura's eyes widened as he looked at the blonde before she was punched so hard she went flying. She rolled across the ground and stopped right in front of the rest of the team. Sakura groaned in pain, a nasty bruise forming on her face. She stood up on shaky legs before leveling a fierce glare at the boy who dared to hit her. "That's it, I'm dragging you back to Konoha in pieces," Sakura raged, nursing her injured hand. They were about to engage each other when a familiar voice, to Naruto, spoke up and sent an all too familiar shiver down his spine. "I'm sorry, but we cannot allow that." Naruto's eyes widened as he slowly turned towards the source of the voice. No way. My luck cannot be that bad," he thought, and prayed that it wasn't who he thought it was. Unfortunately, it was. Walking out of the tree line was one Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki. The recently turned rogue ninja cursed himself as he had completely forgotten about the Akatsuki, and the chance that he may run into one. Naruto gulped as he realized that he was currently in a no-win situation. Even if he dealt with the Konoha team, he would have to deal with these two. He wasn't the only one nervous. The retrieval team, despite youthful arrogance, didn't believe that they could take on these two. They all knew what Itachi was capable of, and that was years ago. In all that time, there was no doubt in their minds he had gotten more powerful. "Naruto Uzumaki," Itachi said, "I suggest that you come with us." Naruto glared at the man and looked between the two teams out to capture him. One so he could be dragged back and punished unlawfully, and another so he could be used to some greater game that he didn't know about. Kisame saw Naruto's hesitance and quickly got impatient. "Forget reasoning, Itachi," the shark man said. "I'm just going to cut off the brat's legs and we can drag him back." Lifting his bandage-wrapped weapon, Kisame launched forward, appearing in front of Naruto in a few seconds before the blonde could perform a substitution. Kisame smirked maliciously as he swung his weapon. Naruto closed his eyes and braced for the pain. Clang! The sound of the bandage-wrapped sword striking metal was not the sound everyone expected. Naruto slowly opened his eyes and gasped at what he saw. There was someone holding off Kisame's weapon with his bare hands. The figure stood as tall as Kisame himself. He was apparently wrapped up in advanced chakra armor. The armor area of his chest and abdomen resembled dark gray muscle. The upper arm, upper legs, and sides were black and had a metal sheen to them. On each shoulder was a small thick shield, most likely a pauldron. His forearms and lower legs had dark gray armored gauntlets and greaves, boots on them with dark blue lines tracing their sides, glowing with power. His head was covered in a helmet designed after a samurai helmet, with a completely black blank face and everything else dark gray. The armored man shifted his weight and sent Kisami's sword upwards and then punched Kisame in the jaw, sending the S-rank murderer flying like a rag doll. Kisame hit the ground, a grunt right next to his teammate. "Damn, that hurt," he said as he got up and angrily pointed his weapon at the interloper, shouting, "Who the hell are you? My name is of no importance to you, Kisame Hoshigaki." His voice was deep and sounded mechanical. He turned his towards Naruto and then at the group. From his point of view, the world looked dark blue as he scanned all the conscious members of the group. Based on bioenergy levels, brainwaves indicating states of mind, and other physical elements, they were deemed a mid to low level threat individually and mid to high altogether. However, a similar scan of Kisame and Itachi showed him that they were a potentially high threat level individually and together. He turned his head towards Naruto before pointing at the retrieval team and asked, "Do you believe that your current skill set will be sufficient in disabling them?" Naruto looked at this new member in surprise and slowly nodded. "Good, you shall deal with them. I shall face off against these two." Naruto nodded and stood up and faced against his former comrades. With that, the new guy and Naruto both charged, ready for the fight to begin. Tsunade nursed a growing headache. This meeting between the councils had been going on for some time now. She was only here because it was part of her job as the Hokage. Ever since Naruto had returned the rogue ninja Sasuke Uchiha, things had been hectic. The ninja clans were all practically calling for the Uchiha to face punishment. They believed that the Uchiha was still a flight risk. He had managed to get away from the village before, and he would be able to do it again. They were all calling for Sasuke to have his mind picked for any information he had on the Sound Village, Orochimaru, and any of his experiments that he had done so far. Then have his chakra sealed off and be imprisoned for life, or just have him executed. The civilians were calling for Naruto to be punished for his brutal treatment, in their opinion attempted murder, of one of the founding clans of Konoha. They were saying some bull about the Uchiha being kidnapped by the Sound Ninja and not going willingly. Basically, they were calling for Naruto to be punished for his assault on their golden boy. Tsunade was growing frustrated with the constant bickering between the two groups. "Enough!" Tsunade yelled in anger, having had enough of this argument. This a council meeting, not an argument between kids. Sasuke Uchiha was convicted of leaving the village on his own. As such, he will be punished. Immediately, Mebuki Haruno, standing in for her husband, stood up and said, "Lady Hokage, while I agree that the Uchiha should face punishment for abandonment of the village. However, we can't do so without getting any information out of him. After being in the Sound Village for about 3 years, he no doubt has some information we can use. As for the assault charge, we do not know what entirely happened. I suggest that we wait until he awakens in the hospital before passing judgment." Mebuki, amongst the civilian council, was a black sheep. While she had hated Naruto years ago, she realized it was pointless to hold the sins of a monster against the boy. Unfortunately, her husband was not of the same mind and they were only together now for their daughter's sake. As such, she was acting a mediator between the two divided factions. She was calling for Sasuke to be punished, just not in a permanent way, and not calling for Naruto to be executed, as he had done what the mission specified, bring Sasuke Uchiha back alive. Sume responded, "I'm with Mebuki on that assessment. I can agree that the Sharingan is an asset and that he has information we can use, but we can't just let the kid's abandonment of the village go unpunished. At most you're all thinking of just giving the kid a slap on the wrist. If he knows he can get away with leaving the village, you know he'll think it's okay to run away again. Besides, the mission was to bring the kid back alive and they did. I don't see why you're trying to bust the kid's chops anyway. His teammates and sensei were on that mission, too. If he is going to be punished, so should they." Another civilian, a rather fat merchant, said, "The Uchiha is royalty in this village. As such, he is exempt from punishment. Besides, only the Uzumaki fought him, according to the reports. As such, he is to blame for the Uchiha's injuries." Hiyashi then said, "Really, then as a member of one of the founding clans of Konoha, Tsunade is exempt from punishment as well. She is technically royalty as well." Before another argument could begin, an Anbu wearing a bird mask appeared in the council room. "Lady Hokage," the Anbu said, "we have just received word from the hospital. Naruto Uzumaki has left the village." Tsunade's eyes widened and yelled, "What?" The fat merchant from earlier said, "Huh. I knew that boy would run sooner or later. Suande didn't even bother to glare at the fat man who had spoken. She simply rose up and launched out of the room towards the hospital. The council members wanted to make sure this was happening. Meanwhile at the hospital, Danzo sat down in a chair, thinking to himself. The plan had been simple. Take Naruto, and turn him into the village's personal attack dog. However, Hirazen's bleeding heart didn't allow him to do so. To get their weapon, he, Kaharu, and Homura, with the help of the civilians of the village, who were blinded by a need for revenge against the beast that caused so much destruction, came up with a plan to get Naruto under the old Warhawk's thumb. Basically, make Naruto look bad so he could be either relocated, or frame him for some crime. He would then be placed under Danzo's care and he would be locked away. The plan had hit a roadblock with Kakashi. Like many of the villagers, the silver-haired Jonin was against Naruto, but he wasn't willing to risk his ninja career by altering mission reports. However, he had reported incidents where he recorded Sasuke as being the main source of mission success, but noted Naruto having a small part, mostly from being too lazy. There were also the missions where no Jonin was present, or just the simple ones. This was fixed when members in records were convinced either through blackmail or bribery, if they weren't on their side, and had the reports altered, including a fake seal of approval. All they needed was the daimyo's approval for Naruto to be arrested for his assault, alleged assault in this case, and he would be arrested. En route to prison, the boy would be intercepted by unknown assailants, really his root Anbu, and grab the boy. Then he would brainwash the boy with one of his many implanted Sharingan eyes, and if that doesn't work, break his will mentally and turn him into the village's weapon, and his personal attack dog. Unfortunately, a monkey wrench was thrown into his plans when the boy apparently discovered their plans. Now that he realized it, the flash of orange from earlier was Naruto. He cursed himself for letting his guard down. It also made him want to update his file. When he learned Naruto had left, this from a nurse sent to check on him, he realized this could work in his favor. He could Naruto's attempt to leave the village against him, and use it to bring him down. Immediately, he told the group of Konoha rookies of Naruto's burden and that it was imperative they get Naruto back, so he could face the charges, trumped up of course, and face trial. He could tell immediately from their reactions, that Kiba and Neji were apparently upset, most likely from their injured pride as they had lost to the boy years ago. Knowing Kiba's brash nature, he was taking the words at face value. From Sakura and Ino, he immediately could tell that their fangirl nature had made the boy public enemy number one to them. Choji, Hinata, Tenten, and Lee all looked shocked, as if they had come to a form of understanding, something that made the old man want to keep an eye on them. What really worried him was the contemplative looks on Shino's and Shikimaru's faces, like they were thinking they weren't being told something. He then had to use his Sharingan eye to influence them to follow his orders to bring Naruto back, even though you can't leave without Suad's permission, saying that they couldn't let Naruto get away. They agreed that Naruto should be brought back. That had been almost 15 minutes ago, and most likely they had caught up to Naruto by now, by his calculations. If his information was accurate, all of them should have no problem taking him down and bringing his weapon back. Danzo. The old war hawk scowled as he turned towards the sound. It was Suande surrounded by the shinobi and civilian council. She stomped up to him and said, "What is going on here? I just learned that Naruto has apparently left the village of his own free will and only 15 minutes after the fact. Why wasn't I told immediately?" Danzo, not threatened by the slug Sanin's anger, said, "I was on the site, to check on our resident Jinchuriki, and I found that he was gone after being checked on by the nurse. As it was necessary, I already dispatched a group of Chunin to bring him back." The woman snarled at the man. "You sent out a group of ninjas without my permission?" She yelled angrily, "You don't have that power, Danzo." The elder said, as an advisor to the Hokage. The woman didn't feel like listening to the man strut like a peacock and yelled, "Your job is to advise your kage on certain matters. You don't have the authority to give out orders to my ninja." Tsunade calmed herself down for a minute before she continued. "You and I are going to be having a very serious conversation. Both you and those other fossils. In the meantime, Anbu, I need you to get some papers from my office. A rank mission clearance for a group to leave the village and retrieve Naruto Uzumaki and bring him back for questioning." One of the civilian council members said, "The boy has clearly abandoned the village. We must kill him before he exposes any of our secrets." Tsunade was about to say something, but Mebuki was a bit faster. What secrets would a genin who hasn't been in the village for 3 years know? If this was your precious Sasuke, you would be calling for him to be brought back alive. Shut your mouth about things you do not understand and let the Hokage do her job. Tsunade nodded thankfully and then turned to one of the Anbu in the room and said, "Well, what are you waiting for?" The Anbu vanished to do his ordered task. Tsunade began to wonder what had happened to make Naruto leave the village. She mentally prayed that Naruto would be brought back so they could have this whole incident cleared up. Meanwhile, Danzo was seething that his plans were going so far off track. However, he still had the daimyo on his side. Knowing the man was more interested in listening to the jingle of coins in his pocket than doing what was best for his main military power. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gotten away with everything that he did. All the old Warhawk had to do now was wait. Meanwhile, with Naruto at the battlefield. The battlefield was shaken up by the group fighting one another. Naruto was currently on the receiving end of a lot of fighters. He had managed to fight them off for now, and was thanking whatever deity that was watching down on them for his training in fighting multiple opponents, usually his own clones, and for his massive chakra reserves and stamina. They had been battling for a few good minutes. Naruto was currently in another fist fight with Lee, he and his teammates being revived by Sakura's medical prowess. He dodged a pair of Jiyuken strikes from Hinata and Neji before spinning on his heel, to dodge a punch from Choji and countering with a powerful elbow into his cheek. The rotund boy was sent crashing the ground. Naruto then performed a substitution, with a log of course, to avoid a barrage of needles launched by Tenten, most likely covered in poison or a paralytic agent. Sakura charged at him from his side, but he quickly knocked her fist away, slammed a fist into her diaphragm, knocking the air from her lungs, and then throwing her over his shoulder in a different direction. Off to the side, Shikamaru and Shino, not being front-line fighters, prepared to fight. Fang over fang. The two drills that were Akamaru and Kiba, launched at the blonde from both sides, when the blonde performed a substitution to avoid the attack. The two wound up slamming into each other. They fell to the ground clutching their heads. Naruto landed a good few feet away from the substitution. As he prepared to fight again, he glanced over his shoulder at his mysterious savior. The unknown was currently engaged in a 2-on-1 brawl with Itachi and Kisame. He was fast enough to dodge Itachi's usual methods of attack and strong enough to stop Kisame's sword. As Naruto glanced at the unknown, Shikamaru and Shino seized their chances. Ninja Art. Shadow Possession Jutsu. The Nara heir's shadow extended and connected with his former comrade's shadow. As soon as the two shadows made contact, Naruto felt his body seize up and he lost his ability to move. Naruto cursed his carelessness, but was immediately drawn from his thoughts to the sound of insects buzzing. Naruto was then aware of the sea of black that surrounded him. Shino's hive. The rest of the group stopped as they realized Naruto was now cornered. They were still prepared to fight, in case he got out of his situation, as unlikely as it seemed. Shikamaru said, "Give up, Naruto, you can't escape now. Even if you can get out of my technique, you can't deal with all of Shino's hive. Just surrender." Naruto growled angrily and said, "You can kiss my orange-clad but pineapple head." Shino sighed, though his visage was currently hidden. You could tell he was frustrated. "Then you leave us no choice, insect bog." The bugs closed in. Naruto was prepared, however, and quickly sent out a massive pulse of lightning chakra through his body. Bug zapper. The massive charge of electricity shocked the entire group. Shino could feel his hive screaming as they were fried by the massive amount of power. The others stepped back, completely shocked by the massive amount of power that Naruto had just showed. Some of the more brash and arrogant, like Neji, Sakura, and Kiba, refused to believe that the amount of strength they were seeing was Naruto. The others who weren't as arrogant were now realizing that underestimating Naruto on this mission had been a huge mistake. The ones who showed real surprise were Shino and Shikamaru. They had theorized that Naruto had gotten stronger in the past 3 years that he had been gone. He had proved himself a good fighter in the Chunin exams and on missions that they had worked together on. However, they didn't know that it had changed that much. Shikamaru was so surprised, his shadow jutsu faltered. Shino quickly withdrew his hive, or what remained of it. Naruto knew that to fight the group in front of him, all at once would get him in deep trouble. So he opted to go a different route. Time for some old-fashioned stealth. Naruto reached into his coat and launched out a trio of balls from his hands, aiming right at Kiba, Akamaru, and Shino. The orbs came within a few feet and then exploded into clouds of smoke. Almost immediately, everyone retched at the awful smell that flooded their noses. What the hell? Kiba yelled, "Oh my god, what the hell is that stench?" Everyone took a step back, as they held their noses to the foul odor. That was one of Naruto's old stink bombs. Shikamaru thought, damn, he just took out 2 of best trackers. 3, if you count Shino's hive's ability to track pheromones. Naruto quickly smirked before forming a few shadow clones and then running off into the trees, putting as much distance between them and him as possible as a mix of the training from Jiraiya and his old prankster habits started to mix, causing a fox-like grin to spread over the boy's face. Damn it, Naruto, get back here. Sakura yelled angrily as he ran off into the trees after the boy, anger over her recent humiliation over her getting hurt overriding her judgment. Sakura, get back here. Shikamaru yelled as she ran off before he cursed under his breath, Sai, go after her, the rest of you split up into teams and find him. The group gave their confirmation of their orders and ran off into the woods after the blonde. Meanwhile, Naruto's unknown ally was currently in a grappling match with Kisame. Kisame was currently having a blast, even though someone was currently interfering with their mission. It had been a very long time since he had fought anybody who could match him in strength alone. He couldn't remember the last time that he felt his adrenaline pump like this. Since he felt his blood rush with excitement, he couldn't remember the last time a fight brought him such enjoyment. As they were brawling, Itachi made sub-let movements as he pulled out a series of shuriken. Fire style. Phoenix flower scarlet claw. Itachi released the shuriken from his grip and then using a fire blast from his mouth, wrapped them in blaze of crimson fire. To add to the flames, he went through a few more hand signs. Fire style. Grande fireball. The fire-enhanced projectiles and projectile fireball all rushed towards Kisame and the still grappling unknown. The shuriken simply bounced off the man's armor, only 2 sticking to his back, as the flames spread. The flames hit the rogue swordsman, only for his body to evaporate into steam, revealing he had switched with a water clone. Kisame smirked and said, guess that new fancy armor didn't do anything. Itachi kept his eyes on the flames. Suddenly, a dark figure could be seen in the center of the blazing inferno. It became clearer and clearer as it moved closer. The armored man was revealed to have no scratches on him, save for a few stubborn embers that stuck to his body. The sound of metal hitting dirt reached their ears. Glancing behind him, they saw that the shuriken that had embedded themselves into his back were falling out. The drone looked at the group with his blank face, giving an emotionless mask that surpassed even Itachi. The drone then opened a special compartment in its back. 2 rods, both about 8 inches in length, shot into the air, before falling, the drone catching them. The tops of each staff glowed briefly, then blades of energy formed, each one almost 3 feet in length. Chakra blades? Itachi thought, his eyebrow cocked in curiosity. Kisame scoffed and said, "Ha, if you knew so much about us, you should know that chakra blades are worthless against Samahata." Kisame charged and swung his massive weapon, only for the armored man to dodge to the left and then swing his own weapons. Kisame blocked, fully expecting the chakra to be drained from the weapons. His confident smirk was replaced with a look of shock when Samahata screeched in agony. He quickly drew back and immediately got on the defensive, dodging a barrage of precisely aimed sword swings. As they passed a tree, one sword swing cut right through it, bringing the smell of burned wood. Kisame jumped back to put some distance between him and the unknown. Itachi was also surprised, though his face didn't show it. His armor gave him the strength to match Kisame, gave him immunity to genjutsu, and uses bizarre energy swords to fight them. Who was this guy? He was cut off from his thoughts when the man charged with his bizarre weapons drawn. In the woods, Team 10, Ino, Choji, and Shikamaru were currently in the middle of the forest. They had followed Naruto's clone and had managed to capture it with a well-placed shadow possession from Shikamaru. While Ino was boasting about they had caught the boy, he burst into smoke. As the blonde was ranting, Choji was attempting to keep her from going crazy, and Shikamaru was examining the immediate area. There was no doubt in his mind that Naruto had some sort of plan going on, as unlikely as it seemed. Up in the trees, Naruto glanced down at the trio. Out of all the teams of his generation, Naruto knew that the Ino Shikacho trio was known for their teamwork, so he knew he had to act fast before they could get into one of their infamous formations. Not only that, but Ino could have learned her clan's ability to telepathically communicate with others. Add in Shikimaru's superior intellect and they would be a problem. Naruto mentally thanked the old pervert for idea to learning about his fellow comrades in case of a future competition. Naruto reached into his bag and pulled out a grenade-like cylinder. Naruto felt a brief hint of nostalgia as he popped it and then threw it at the trio. The device struck the ground and exploded into a blast of blue smoke and black powder. Shikimaru jumped back and knew that this was Naruto's work. Before he could do anything, however, he suddenly realized that he was incredibly itchy. He quickly realized that the bomb had been laced with itching powder. Ino and Choji soon followed their boss's lead and began scratching like crazy. "Geez," Choji groaned in annoyance as he scratched himself like he had fleas. First a stink bomb, now a canister of itching powder? Hell's King of Pranks is making a comeback. Oh man, what did he put in this stuff? Ino was sharing Choji's sentiments and said, "I'm going to murder that blonde moron." Naruto then leapt from the trees and said, "Well, here I am then, flower girl." Ino growled angrily as she went through hand signs for her signature jutsu. She fully intended to transfer her mind into the boys and tear it apart. Shikimaru realized this as a ploy by Naruto and tried to stop her, but it was too late. Mind transfer jutsu. Ino's mind launched forward from her body, leaving her limp. Naruto smirked at this and quickly performed another substitution, with Shikimaru this time. The next thing the genius knew, his mind was being forced back as Ino took over his body. The possessed Chunin looked down at his hands with a shocked expression. Choji realized what this meant and turned only to get a punch to the face, a knee to the gut, and a getting thrown over Naruto's shoulder to slam into a tree. Naruto then quickly performed a powerful curb stomp on the Pone Ino's stomach, utilizing the long-time weakness of her family technique. The male blonde then launched forward towards the shell-shocked Ino, Shikimaru, and slammed her in the stomach. A barrage of punches would result in some nasty bruises that began to appear on Ino's body as well. To finally finish the job, Naruto punched the possessed Chunin before grabbing him by the skull and slamming him skull first into a tree. The Chunin hit the ground unconscious. Moments later, Ino moved slightly, indicating she was back in her body, but feeling the combination of her own injuries and the ones dealt to Shikimaru. Naruto smirked and turned to Choji, who just got up from his spot on the ground and growled before charging. The two began a rather brutal hand-to-hand fight. Choji had Naruto beat in size and it was clear that he was putting his weight into his punches. Naruto used his smaller frame to his advantage, ducking, bobbing, and weaving through the attacks, and then counter-attacking. Naruto dodged a punch and threw a shot that struck the Akamichi heir in the stomach, making him double over. Naruto then grabbed Choji's head and threw up a knee into his face, breaking his nose and causing blood to leak. Angry, Choji then went for his signature technique. He jumped back and used his expansion technique to bloat himself up. Naruto expected this and quickly began to throw a Rasengan in his hand. He was shocked, however, when Choji's hair wrapped around him and formed spikes. Something Naruto remembered seeing the old pervert do during one of their many spars. The surprise quickly faded, and Naruto brought his technique to bear, just in case. The two charged and prepared for the final stand. Spiked human boulder. Wind style. Rasengan. The two techniques clashed. The resulting pulse kicked up dust and sent wind smashed into the trees, sending loose leaves from the branches. The two attacks ground against each other, the chakra-infused hair holding up against the spiral sphere of chakra. After a moment, Naruto pushed more chakra into the technique, pushing Choji back and knocking him out of his boulder form. Taking advantage of the chubby boy's temporary disorientation and rushed forward. The remained strength of the wind chakra-enhanced Rasengan slammed into Choji's stomach, causing him to scream in pain as it ground away at clothes and burned the skin and muscle beneath it. Choji, still screaming, was sent flying into a nearby tree and struck it with enough force to break it. With the Akamichi now unconscious, Team 10 was officially taken out of play. Naruto smirked at his victory before shaking his head. Now was not the time to get cocky. He quickly sent out a pulse and found that Team 8 was now the closest to him. He then made for them, intent on taking them down. Naruto quickly found themselves standing around. Kiba, Akamaru, and Hinata were currently looking for him, while Shino seemed to be performing a technique of his own. Naruto could feel something off, but he couldn't tell what was. He guessed that it was something to do with the boys' hive. Naruto began to think of something to take them out and came up with a plan rather quickly. Staying downwind of Hinata, he approached the group. Down with Team 8, damn it, where is he? Kiba growled angrily, Akamaru barking alongside him. Since Naruto had hit them with one of his old stink bombs, his entire sense of smell was messed up. This was supposed to be an easy mission. When the hell did Naruto start thinking like this? Naruto was practically the Omega of their class, and that was how it was supposed to be. He was the only one frustrated. Because the smell had clung to his clothes, Shino's hive was also slightly incapacitated, due to the Kakaichu's sensitive sense of smell. Add in the damage he had done earlier with his surprise lightning attack, and Shino was beyond frustrated. Right now, he was using one of his clan techniques to speed up the repairs to his hive. Out of all three, Hinata seemed to be the least upset. Her Byakugan was the only thing that seemed to work at this point. The mission was proving hard for the now long-haired Hyuga. She didn't like having to fight her, not so secret, Crush, but she had to bring him back, if only just to understand why he would want to leave. The boy had always preached about becoming the Hokage, so why would he just leave out of the blue? Off the side, Naruto, still in stealth mode, came down and moved nearby one of the group, specifically Akamaru. Naruto glanced down at the large hound, who glanced up at the hound before blowing a raspberry at the dog. The dog snarled and barked loudly before charging forward. The rest of the team turned towards the dog as it charged. Naruto dodged the swipe before grabbing the ninja hound's rear right leg. He swung the hound around in the air before throwing the nearly horse-sized dog over at Kiba, who didn't react in time. He was nearly crushed underneath the weight of his partner. Naruto then charged forward, leapt over the dog and then stomped hard, right on Kiba's skull, knocking him out. Naruto formed a pair of shadow clones who proceeded to do the same to Akamaru, incapacitating the hound. To follow up, all three charged at Shino and Hinata. Hinata took a step back as Shino pulled out his arm and sent out a wave of new Kakaichu. However, much like his earlier technique, the two clones burst out lightning from their bodies, frying the two bugs. The two clones then leapt into the air, somersaulting in the air, as lightning erupted from their legs to the air and came down with a shout. Clone lightning axe kick. The two axe kicks connected with Shino's shoulders before he could create a bug clone. The physical blow strained Shino's bones and the lightning shocked him, damaging flesh and nerves and frying a good amount more of the Abarame's hive. Shino let out a scream before he fell over, out cold. Naruto turned towards Hinata, dispelling his clones. The girl looked nervous before getting down into her family's traditional stance. "Please, Naruto," she said, "just come back with us. We only want to get things figured out." Naruto sighed and said, "Figure what out? Those council bastards saw a chance to get rid of me and they are. If you don't believe me, then the daimyo is going to be arriving in a few days to discuss an issue involving a potential traitor." Hinata's eyes widened. People were conspiring against Naruto? In her own village. She guessed it might have to be about the Kyuubi, but that was ridiculous. Naruto wouldn't do anything to harm the village. He had stated that as many times as he wore orange. There was no way anyone in their village would have to try Naruto executed or killed. No way. Naruto saw the surprise and disbelief in her eyes. He just shook his head. She had never seen the worst of Konoha, like Naruto had. She may have a hard time due to her father, sister, and cousin, but she never had been dealt with. Naruto then charged, taking Hinata by surprise before chopping her on the back of the neck, knocking her out. Naruto sighed as the Hyuga heiress fell to the ground out cold. Naruto then turned to leave, but was stopped when a barrage of kunai landed at his feet. Naruto turned towards the direction they came from and saw the remains of Team 7 and Team 9. Sakura cracked her knuckles and charged forward, completely ignoring the shouts of Neji, who was currently in charge in place of Shikamaru. She charged forward, and Naruto wound up grappling her. The two stared at one another, glaring at one another. "Just give up, already," she said. "You're coming back with us, whether you like it or not." Naruto didn't answer her. He was tired of this old song and dance. He smiled and said, "To think, I used to consider that forehead of your charming back in the day. Just so charming and kissable." Sakura's eyes widened. Those words. She remembered Sasuke saying those words to her just before running off, apparently feeling shy about admitting his feeling for her. How did Naruto know what Sasuke said to her? She didn't get a chance to ponder this before slamming his knee into her stomach. Naruto then punched her and sent her rolling backwards. Sakura immediately got up and glared at her. Naruto snarled and said, "Listen, I've told you before, I'm not going back." Neji smirked and said, "You don't have much of a choice. Even if we can't beat you, our backup will?" Naruto blinked and asked, "Backup?" Neji simply smiled and said, "I can see them. An Anbu and at least 3 Jonin. Even if you defeat us, you will have to defeat them." Naruto narrowed his eyes. Naruto wasn't sure about everyone in Anbu. On top of that, he wasn't sure he had the skill or experience to defeat 1 Jonin, let alone 3. Neji didn't entirely count as he had only been recently promoted. "Naruto," Lee said, "you are outmatched. Please, just surrender, my friend. You cannot defeat all of us." Naruto sighed and said, "I told you before, I'm not going back, Lee." Tenten brought out her scroll and said, "Naruto, either you give up, or we just beat your orange-wearing ass unconscious and drag you back. What is it going to be?" Naruto looked between them all and reached out with his sensor ability. He could sense the fight between his unknown and the Akatsuki members. He also could sense the 3 Jonin and Anbu coming their way. Naruto sighed and said, "I'll take option 3. He formed a familiar hand signs and said, "Beat the crap out of all of you and run." Mass Shadow Clone Jutsu. There was an enormous puff of smoke surrounding them. As soon as the clone were gone, there were multiple shadow cones surrounding the remaining teams on all sides. The Chunin and Jonin were all staring on in shock as they saw just how many shadow clones Naruto could make. If Lee wasn't so shocked, he would be spouting about the flames of youth right now. The group got ready to fight, but Naruto was one step ahead. Every clone leapt up into the air, and Naruto focused all his strength and slammed his fist into the ground with a small, local quake that managed to knock the group's balance off. As the clones descended, Naruto and his clones called out the formation. Naruto 2K Uzumaki Barrage. Meanwhile, Itachi had seen many things in his life as a missing nin. However, this was something that had flabbergasted him. The mission had been simple. Zetsu had found that Naruto was leaving the village and they decided now was a good time to obtain the Kyuubi. They had found Naruto about to confront his friends. Then they were interrupted by this unknown armored individual. As the fight progressed, Itachi realized that this guy was no normal man. He was far stronger than any human being, aside from Tsunade or Kakuzu. Then there were his weapons. Those weapons didn't seem to rely on chakra as they burned through everything they touched, including the water and even the air, something he could easily smell. Right now, Itachi was sporting some bloody knuckles from a close-range attack that went bad. He was also suffering from some slight chakra drain because his armor allowed him to tank, basically all the techniques he threw. He also had some burned spots on uniform from some just barely dodged sword slices. Meanwhile, Kisami's arm was currently broken from a grappling contest that went horribly wrong. If that wasn't enough, he also had a long, cauterized gash across his chest which, if Kisami's expression was anything to go by, hurt like absolute hell. He also had a large bruise on his face, and was clearly missing a tooth. All in all, there were too many unknowns with this guy. Who was he? Where did he get his armor and weapons? How had someone with this skill in building, weaponry, and fighting skill eluded them? "I am through wasting time," he said. "I will terminate you now. You have interfered with my mission long enough." He held out his hand and was about to act, when something happens. He glanced at the side. The man then turned to a different direction. Then, he deactivated his swords and put them back into his back. He turned and then shot off into the forest at such a fast clip, it would have made a certain green-suited Jonin jealous. Itachi turned towards his partner and said, "Kisame, we are leaving." The shark man turned and said, "What do you mean we're leaving?" "We have to." The former mist shinobi was stopped mid-complaint when he saw the sharp glare of his comrade. "We are both injured by an unknown who is currently still around. There is also the fact that there is likely backup coming for the Konoha shinobi. We are in no position to face off against them. especially with your arm and chest wound. Now, we must retreat. I am fairly certain that Pain will want to learn of this new player." Kisame growled, but he knew that his normally silent partner was right. His burn was really starting to hurt, and he couldn't fight with his arm broken. On top of that, Samahata had taken some damage as well, from the man's bizarre weapons, and he needed time to be repaired. With a small grunt, the two vanished in a blur of speed. Back with Naruto. Naruto blinked as he stood over his fallen comrades. The group had been completely overpowered by his clones and himself. They were on the ground with several bruises and injuries, but they weren't going to be crippled or die from their injuries. As he stood victoriously and the last of his clones vanished, he suddenly had a thought. Why didn't I just do that to all of them earlier? The sound of something hitting the ground got the blonde's attention. He turned around and let out a sigh of relief when he saw it was his new friend, he hoped. "Hey, big guy," he said, "thanks for the help back there with Kisame and Itachi." Thanks is not necessary," he said, "I was simply fulfilling my mission." Naruto nodded and looked at him with a curious eye. If I might ask, what was your mission?" He answered, "To prevent your capture and then deliver you to my creator." Suddenly, the man's head opened, revealing machinery and wires inside. A triangle-shaped object shot out and hooked onto Naruto's face. Naruto grabbed at the hose and tried to tear it, but suddenly the large machine grabbed the blonde's hand and stopped him. After a moment, Naruto's movements started to slow until he fell over and lost consciousness. The drone then proceeded to pick up Naruto. The rest of his body, his chest, arms, and legs, opened up as well and then pulled him inside of his body, and then closed up. The robot's back then opened, revealing a pair of thrusters, which fired up and sent him flying up into the air. As he flew off, several shinobi from Konoha, including an Anbu with a fox mask, Kakashi, Guy, and Asuma arrived. Kakashi said, "Spread out, see if you can find them. If Naruto has gotten away, they may know where he has gone, or at least have a hint." Little did they know that Naruto was long gone, in a direction they would not be able to follow. Several miles above the surface, the drone flew up, flying high above the clouds. Suddenly, a bright blue energy field formed around him as his feet fired off jets like the ones on his back. He flew higher and higher until he finally shot through the atmosphere. Now surrounded by the icy void of space, his body began to glow slightly red, to add heat and warmth to his currently sleeping and unwilling passenger. He flew through the void, approaching the massive dome, hidden in the shadow of the moon. "Creator, I have returned with subject Naruto Uzumaki. What are my orders?" After a moment, an answer came over the droid's internal computer. "Bring him to the control. Make him comfortable. Seeing as we have, essentially, kidnapped him, he is bound to be a little bit upset." The drone understood this and flew towards dome and entered through large bay door open on the side. The drone landed in the middle of a large square-shaped room. The door closed and the voice of caretaker spoke. "Door closed. Oxygen levels rising. Rising, oxygen levels at prime levels. Artificial gravity activated." Another door opened, and the drone walked through the hall, his metal feet echoing through the empty hall. The lights came on room, filling the room with light as he walked. He eventually entered a room where various machines sat. After that, his body opened, and Naruto's unconscious form tumbled out. The mask attached changed what was pumped into it, resulting in Naruto awakening before it separated. Naruto jumped and spun around, looking around frantically. "Alright, buddy, where did you take me? What the hell are you and what is going on?" Suddenly, a new voice said, "Relax, Mr. Uzumaki. We do not mean you any harm." Naruto spun around, trying to pinpoint where the voice was coming from. "Who's there?" the blonde asked, sounding annoyed. The sound of something moving got the ninja's attention. He turned around and saw a bowl-sized object floating towards him. On top of it was a small creature that could easily fit in Naruto's hand. It was only a few inches tall with gray skin, and green eyes with a horizontal bar pupil, like that of a toad. He wore a black suit that clung to him with a metal belt buckle around his waist, and dark gray gloves, which only had 3 fingers and a thumb. He also had 2 small tendrils coming off his face, between his mouth and eyes, acting like a small mustache. "Greetings," the frog thing said, with a small wave. Naruto blinked in shock at what he was seeing. What are you, some weird toad or something?" The creature chuckled and said, "No, I am not. However, I can see where you would get that mixed up. My species does have several similarities with amphibians. He chuckled again and Naruto just stared. Now that all the jokes are out of the way, we can get to business, the creature said. My name is Merlin. And I have an offer for you. Naruto blinked as he stared at the little frog-like creature that stood before him. So far this has been a very weird day. Naruto had learned there was a conspiracy against him, left Konoha, fought off against some of his comrades to get away from said conspiracy, was grabbed by a robot, and was now standing in front of a little gray frogman who told him that he had an offer he wanted to make. I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. Who are you, what are you, and where the hell am I? Merlin let out a chuckle and said, oh, I'm sorry. I guess I should have explained a bit more. The frogman snapped his fingers and a chair floated down from out of nowhere. Naruto looked a little freaked out about the chair that had floated down from the ceiling, but he wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. He sat down on the floating chair, which was surprisingly comfy. However, he was still preparing, ready to spring at a moment's notice if he needed to. As Naruto sat down, Merlin continued, as for where you are in a facility that I managed to build, hidden away from the rest of the world. As for what I am an alien. A Galvan to be more precise. Naruto blinked and after he processed this information started to freak out. What? Oh no. Please, don't probe me or take my brain. Merlin looked shocked before his angry expression crossed his face. Oh, seriously, what is with this probing and brain-stealing nonsense? That has been considered a medical malpractice for several centuries already. I don't know why those idiots in the media thought that would be a good idea. What the hell would we even be looking for down there? And if I wanted to examine a brain, I could find one of a less sentient race, or at the very least examined a freaking holographic one. As Merlin ranted, Naruto took a small slide back from the minuscule alien. After about another few minutes of rambling and raging, he started to calm down. Seeing Naruto's surprised expression, the Galvan cleared his throat. Forgive me, I'm usually a bit more composed than that. It's just that those media stereotypes really get on my nerves sometimes, especially the ones that show the more intelligent races being war-hungry, brain-stealing thugs. Naruto nodded and mentally made a note to keep any science fiction references to himself. Naruto then said, you said something about an offer? Merlin nodded and said, yes. You see, Mr. Uzumaki, I've been watching you for about 2 years. And I believe you would be a prime candidate for my grand experiment. Naruto blinked and suddenly felt nervous. What kind of experiment? Merlin noted the nervous tone the blonde boy was using and quickly added, oh no, nothing dangerous, I assure you. You see, it all started years ago. Feeling this might be a long story, Naruto got comfy. Many years ago, me and my younger brother had a bit of sibling rivalry between one another. We would always try to outdo one another in various ways to prove who was the smartest, or to get a date with a beautiful lady. Naruto rolled his eyes at this. Anyway, one day we decided to engage in one more challenge to prove who was the best genius. We decided to build a device, one that could be used to build bridges and take down walls between the various species of the universe. A way to bring the universe itself together. Naruto blinked at the goal. That seemed like a very good idea. Jiraiya had told the blonde boy, while on their training trip, how he wished to see the elemental nations at peace himself. No more wars, no more of this insanity, just a nice lasting peace. Merlin continued, we both set out to do that. I believed that the best way to do this was to see through the eyes of another species. A device that could allow a person to change into any creature they could, so long as they had a sample of their DNA. I set out to gain the DNA and I managed to procure it. Unfortunately, things went rather wrong at that point. Naruto blinked in confusion and asked, what happened? Merlin sighed and said, you see, there is a high council on my planet, Galvan Prime. They believe that our technology should be kept to ourselves as they were afraid that our technology could be used for terrible things. When they found out that I had the various samples of foreign DNA, they arrested me. My brother tried to convince them of my innocence, but it was not to be and I was banished. Naruto's eyes widened and said, I'm sorry. Merlin looked at the boy, his green eyes filled with sadness, and said, it is all right. Where was I? Oh yes. I was lost for a while, traveling from planet to planet, working various jobs to get by. When, suddenly word reached me of a boy who could transform into various aliens with a device attached to his wrist. Naruto had a look of realization on his face and said, "Your device." Merlin nodded and said, "My dear brother apparently finished my work and created a device that could allow a species to transform into another species." I was excited, however, I felt my old scientific curiosity come back to me. Merlin allowed a smile to cross his face and said, "I found a planet full of old wrecked ships. I took some time, especially with my size, but I managed to create a ship that would take me across the universe. Over time I gathered DNA and new technology which would allow me to create various machines, weapons, and devices that would aid me in my adventures. However, I found that I needed something very important, a person who could use this power." Naruto blinked in surprise and asked, "Me?" Merlin nodded and answered, "Yes. Like I've said, I've been watching you. You have heart, my dear boy. You have shown you can defy the odds many times. I believe that you are a prime candidate. So what do you say?" Naruto was really interested, but he needed to ask, "What's in it for me and, are there any strings attached?" Merlin sighed and answered, "Well, you get to be something more than just a member of your planet. You'll get to see the universe in its entirety. You will have power beyond that of your species. Plus, it will keep you away from those who want to harm you." Naruto nodded as those were some very good points. Then Naruto asked, "What about the strings?" Merlin sighed again and said, "I'll admit, there will be some changes due to the processes. Your DNA will forever be altered. If you were to go to a hospital on your planet, they would notice anomalies almost immediately. You will never be considered human again." Naruto's eyes widened when he heard this. He would be changed down to his very DNA. There was no telling how this would alter him. There was just one thing he had to ask. "What happens if I say no?" Merlin answered, "Then, I will have you placed back on your planet. Have your memory of this entire incident with me and my creation here wiped. It will be like you just started running after the defeat of your former comrades." Naruto sighed in relief, glad to know that he wasn't about to be disintegrated. He looked at Merlin and closed his eyes in thought. There seemed to be some serious pros and cons here. On one hand, if he did this, he wouldn't be able to go home again due to his changed DNA, but other than the perverted sage, Granny, and Iruka, he probably didn't have much waiting for him back home. He could explore the universe, see what was truly out there. He could also say no and just continue with his life. His thought turned towards getting protection from Koyuki, and that potentially going wrong with Danzo pulling some crap that will lead to a huge problem, and on top of that the Akatsuki. He imagined the Akatsuki members breaking down the gates to Koiki's palace. Naruto mentally shuddered at the thought. He was nowhere ready to face off against ninja who eclipsed him in power and skill. He could use the Kyuubi's chakra, but no doubt they would have countermeasures for that, like when he was trying to find Tsunade. With that thought, the blonde made up his mind. "I'm in." Merlin smiled and said, "Are you sure? This is a very big decision that you're making, my boy." Naruto nodded and said, "Yeah, I'm sure." Merlin smiled and said, "Great. Now come. Since you're going to be staying here for a while, I might as well give you the tour." Naruto rose up from his seat and followed Merlin. Behind him the drone stayed behind. "Oh, right," Merlin said, having forgotten about the robot, "return to the bay for repairs and examination. After that, deactivate until new orders are ready." The machine answered, "Yes, sir." The three left the room, Naruto and Merlin going one direction while the drone went in another. The next chapter of Naruto's life was about to begin. Meanwhile, down on Earth, a random cave system. Kisame and Itachi, having had a narrow escape from the Konoha ninja, now stood in a cave system, surrounded by various holograms, or whatever those things were, and were currently retelling the failure of their mission. They had had a close call with some of the Anbu that tailed the Jonin to help the others who were to retrieve the now rogue blonde. "You two failed to complete your mission," Idara said. A mocking smile aimed at Itachi. "Looks like that Sharingan of yours isn't that great." As usual, Itachi didn't take the bait, but he did send an annoyed look towards the Mad Bomber. Pain simply rubbed his chin in thought. This unknown figure was capable of going toe-to-toe with two of their more powerful members. Add in the fact that he came and went so quickly, was immune to Itachi's Sharingan, and used weapons that seemed more advanced than what was being produced in Spring Country. Who was he and what did he want with the Uzumaki boy? Pain simply said, "Itachi, Kisame, return to base for treatment. Zetsu, I want you to keep an eye out for this man. We need to know who he is and why he saw fit to interfere with our mission." Itachi and Kisame both nodded before the holograms faded. Kisame and Itachi began their trek back to the Hidden Rain village. Back in Konoha, Tsunade rubbed her head as he approached the room where the Konoha rookies were being held. The Slug Princess was not happy. Danzo had gone behind her back, letting a group of Chunin, and one Jonin, out to retrieve Naruto without her permission or order. Thankfully, Naruto hadn't killed any of them, but they were going to be sore. In the meantime, the council was demanding that Anbu be sent out to hunt down Naruto to either kill him or drag him back. These went unanswered of course, as she originally believed that Naruto would be detained. However, after seeing the entire group beaten down, she realized that wasn't going to happen. If things weren't crazy enough, she just learned that the Fire Daimyo was on his way to the village right now to discuss something important with her, and would arrive sometime tomorrow. She could only guess that Danzo had something to do with this. Tsunade sighed as he went over the papers. This was going to be a very, very long day. Her attention was grabbed when, suddenly, Jiraiya burst through the front door of the hospital. He ran towards her and skidded to a stop, panting as he tried to regain his breath. "Haim," he panted, "what's going on? Please tell me that you and Naruto are conspiring to prank me." The Toad Sannin had arrived in the village while the Naruto retrieval team had gone, and he wasn't aware that Naruto had gone because, as usual, he immediately went to the hot springs to get some inspiration for his latest book. When he arrived at Tsunade's office to give her his latest report, he was told, by an ANBU, about Naruto leaving and the failure to be brought back. All the Anbu saw after that was a Jiraiya-shaped dust cloud. As Tsunade stood there looking at the man, she shook her head no, indicating what the old pervert had feared. He had always wondered when Naruto would have enough and just leave. Now he had an answer. Deep inside, he felt guilt boil in his gut and burn away at his herd. He began to feel sick as he realized that he had failed his first student. Jiraiya didn't care for Naruto in his early life because of his spy network, only checking on him when he came to do his reports, and he didn't notice anything wrong. Of course, the old spymaster wasn't as observant as he should have been. There was another reason that he didn't care for Naruto back then. He was scared. The old sage was scared. What would happen to the boy with a life on the road and his own skills? There were times when he could barely care for himself, let alone an infant. He wasn't the only one. Tsunade was also hit by a good amount of guilt. She left Konoha because the village had taken so much from her. Her grandmother, grandfather, granduncle, boyfriend, and little brother. After Kushina, who she viewed as pseudo-daughter, she left, using her Sannin travel rights, and drowned herself in her vices, gambling and sake. Tsunade then told Jiraiya about where the Naruto retrieval team was and what room they were in. The pair of Sannin walked towards the room. As they walked, the pair couldn't help but wonder what the situation would be like if one or both of them had stayed around to raise the boy. As they walked, Tsunade informed him on what happened, including what Danzo had done, that she knew of. They arrived at the room and Jiraiya was surprised, but not very surprised at what he saw. All of them had various bruises and scrapes, most likely from Naruto fighting them. However, some of them had very specific injuries. Ino had some bandages around her waist. Shikimaru had some bandages on his stomach as well. Choji had several more bandages, and Jiraiya guessed the Akamichi heir was hit with either a strong Rasengan, or a weak version of one of Naruto's elemental versions. All three of them also seemed to have a minor rash, something he recognized from Naruto's personal itching powder, which included shredded bits of poison ivy, according to Naruto's pranking tales from their trip. Kiba, Akamaru most likely at a veterinarian to get patched up, had a bandage wrapped around his head and some which he guessed from Naruto's stink bombs. Shino had some bandages around his shoulders, and had a foul smell lingered about him too. Hinata was the only one who seemed to have very few injuries. The other teams only had various bruises, bumps, and minor scrapes and cuts. By examination, they had been on the receiving end of a serious beating. With the group of injured shinobi were their senseis, Kakashi, Gai, Kurenai, looking pregnant, and Asuma. Off to the side, Inoichi was currently writing down some notes, most likely having used his abilities to enter their minds while they were unconscious to get answers. Such a thing was legal if the shinobi was. Jiraiya sighed and said, "I have a feeling that your mission was a failure." Neji answered, "Unfortunately, yes, it would appear Naruto was far more skilled than we originally believed." Jiraiya simply stared at the Hyuga prodigy and said, Naruto has been away from the village for almost 3 years. Did you honestly think that Naruto wouldn't have improved in so long? Neji looked rather flustered at this as he remembered his failure in his mission and feeling a little frustrated at his loss. In their first battle, Naruto had been forced to use the Kyuubi's chakra to win their battle, but this time he didn't need to. From her hospital bed, Sakura growled angrily. She had been the top kunoichi of her class, she had been trained by Tsunade, and she still hadn't been strong enough to take the blonde boy down. Sakura clenched her fist as she snarled angrily. She would get him back for this humiliation. She would show him what happens when you mess with Sakura Haruno. She wasn't the only one. Ino, Kiba, and Neji were considering upping their own training to get back at the boy for this incredible humiliation. As the 4 ninjas considered what to do for revenge, a silence had passed in silence. What I want to know, Kurenai said, breaking the silence, is how Naruto got so good. He never showed this kind of skill a few years ago. Asuma, chewing on some gum because he wasn't allowed to smoke in the hospital, said, no idea. Kakashi, nose in his porn as usual, simply said, no clue. Naruto didn't show that kind of skill at all when I taught him. Suddenly loud, somewhat obnoxious, laughter filled the air. Everyone was surprised to see that Jiraiya was the one laughing. He was laughing like he had just heard the world's funniest joke. After a few moments the man stopped laughing, catching his breath, before he fixed the perverted scarecrow with a blank gaze. You really are an idiot, Kakashi. You speak about looking underneath the underneath, but you are completely clueless. Kakashi still had his nose in his porn book, apparently not taking the sage's words seriously. With an annoyed scowl, Jiraiya walked right up to the man, snatched it from his hands and then threw it out the nearest open window. Thankfully, it would land in open dumpster where no kids would find it. Kakashi looked shocked at the loss of his precious book and was about to say something, but the look in the Toad Sage's eyes stopped the silver-haired man cold. Asuma, Guy, and Kurenai were surprised at the old sag's actions. They had only known him as the self-proclaimed super pervert. However, it was a little-known fact that, if the old sage ever took a situation seriously, then only someone like Tsunade or Orochimaru would be able to stop him. It made the Jonin nervous. The younger generation was surprised to see the old pervert was serious. Something that, those who knew about him, were not used to seeing from the usually comical sage. Sakura, undeterred by the man's change in attitude, scoffed, "What's that supposed to mean?" There was nothing more to see with that idiot. He was loud, obnoxious, and nothing but a hindrance, especially to Sasuke. There was nothing more for anyone to see in the dead last. Several others seemed to agree. The exceptions seemed to be Lee, Shino, Shikimaru, and Hinata. It made Jiraiya slightly annoyed with this generation. He himself had been labeled the dead last in his years at the academy. It had taken him forever, but he managed to get the recognition he deserved after proving he had gotten better over the years. Now these kids were making the same mistake. It was time for the Toad Sage to put an end to that. Jiraiya turned to the Rosette and said, "So, if he's the dead last, then why is the top kunoichi of her graduating class and the rookie of the year from his class currently in a hospital while the dead last stands in victory?" Sakura growled, angered at the insult towards her pride, and was about to yell something, only for the Toad Sage to cut her off. "If that isn't enough proof, Lee here, the dead last of his class, is by far the best in taijutsu of your generation, arguably." Sakura blinked at the man's answer. She tried to give him a comeback, but before she could he continued. "Now, tell me, why should Naruto still be weak? So that you and your little crush can have their so-called happy ending? Your happy ending with a guy who barely seems to even acknowledge the fact that you existed even in the beginning of your teen days." Sakura let out another growl as she tried to say something, but Jiraiya raised his hand, silencing her. "In all honesty," the man continued, "I'm beginning to wonder why we go with these titles anyway, especially since once you're out of the academy they mean absolute crap." Kakashi looked annoyed as he said this. The Scarecrow walked forward and said, "Now Jiraiya, you know that isn't exactly true. Naruto was abysmal in the academy and once he was out of it, he didn't really improve much." The other Jonin seemed to agree, mostly hearing from Kakashi's stories, most of them being assumptions that Sasuke had been the brains behind the incidents, through his blatant favoritism and immediate labeling of Naruto. Jiraiya sighed and said, Kakashi. That would be true if you had actually been a teacher. You left Naruto and Sakura both on their own while you personally trained Sasuke. You kept telling Naruto that he needed more chakra control to learn, but you never taught him any exercises other than the tree walking exercise, which you didn't teach them until your first C rank turned into an A- rank. He came up with a strategy that saved your life, and don't say it was Sasuke because only Naruto is capable of thinking off the wall like that. He fought against and defeated Zabuza's apprentice with a little help, while your golden boy was going the world's best impression of a hedgehog. In the Chunin exams he managed to make it to the finals, something many of you thought he couldn't do. Oh, and Kiba, he beat you while having a handicap that messed up his chakra flow. Think about that for a moment. This surprised the group as they didn't know the real story behind the mission to Wave. Kiba remembered his defeat and was shocked that Naruto had a handicap, as was Kurenai. It showed just how much they underestimated him because of his dead last title. On top of that, you trained Sasuke personally, like he was your own apprentice. You taught him various fire jutsu, even that cursed Chidori that you were so damn proud of, which he had no problem using on my own apprentice several times. Kakashi winced slightly, just barely noticeable, while many of the other shinobi were shocked beyond words. Kakashi's motto of abandoning your comrades and were beginning to realize just how hypocritical the man was, and it made them sick. It also made the retrieval team realize that Naruto had a very crappy teacher. Kakashi defended, Naruto was too impatient. He couldn't sit still, and he never really showed much improvement. In all honesty, I thought I couldn't be able to teach him. The white-haired Sannin said, so you basically bet all your money on who seemed to have the most potential and ignored the other two. I can't tell you how stupid that is. Not to mention how much this is a painful repeating of history, he mentally added. Jiraiya simply said, since you believed Naruto was a lost cause, allow me to clarify a few things. First off, the reason Naruto was so bad in the academy was because he had too much chakra. Hell, he had more chakra than anyone in the academy. Sakura immediately shot up and, that's a lie. Sasuke had the most chakra. Naruto couldn't even create a clone and Sasuke could perform a fire jutsu. Jiraiya sent a blank stare to her and was about to say something, but Shino spoke up. Actually, the Aburame heir said, Naruto did have higher chakra than most of us during the academy and even on our mission to bring him back, despite his injuries and the drain from his fight with Sasuke. Everyone looked at Shino with a shocked expression. He continued, my insects investigated the chakra levels of my potential teammates. I found early on that Naruto had higher chakra levels than most of our class. I brought this to a teacher's attention, but nobody did anything. After another attempt, I found that it was pointless to continue to attempt to do so. This brought thoughtful looks to the group. Naruto was so weak, because he was so powerful? Lee suddenly felt a feeling of kinship with Naruto. They were both the dead last in their class due to their chakras seemingly working against them. Ino blinked and asked, why would they do that? Jiraiya turned towards the platinum blonde and said, it's a common technique for training Jinchuriki. They keep their regular skills low so their ace in the hole is their main skill. If they try to rebel, their only main skill is how to use can easily be countered. This brought shocked looks to everyone. Naruto was being sabotaged early on? Jiraiya then said, as for Naruto not showing any progress, Naruto learned the Shadow Clone Jutsu in a short amount of time, and his chakra levels allow him to make over 100 of them and not feel any sort of side effects. The retrieval team all felt some phantom pain from the massive one-sided beatdown by Naruto and over 100 shadow clones in a single sitting. The sage continued, during the month to prepare for the Chunin exams, Naruto learned how to summon the toad boss Gamabunta in under a month. He probably would have learned sooner, but hey, research. Which he has been able to summon at least twice, once during Gaara and some other mission. Neji's eyes widened as he remembered hearing about how a giant toad had fought against a giant sand monster during the Chunin exams, but he had thought it was Jiraiya, but after hearing that he had doubts. Glancing to the side, he noticed Shino and Ino both nodding in confirmation, remembering the mission to Sea Country. The white-eyed prodigy paled slightly as he realized that there were several ways that his fight against Naruto could have gone badly if he had summoned a large enough toad. What? Sakura asked, surprised, but I heard it was Sasuke was the one to beat Gaara. Jiraiya didn't dignify the fangirl's words with a verbal response. Instead he summoned a familiar toad who handed the white-haired pervert a scroll. Jiraiya unrolled it, revealing the names written on it, including Naruto. Kurenai, Asuma, and Guy were all shocked that Naruto had been able to learn how to summon at such a young age. They now realized that Kakashi had been sitting on a literal gold mine and he had walked away from it for a piece of fool's gold. Jiraiya wasn't finished, however. If that is not enough, the sage continued, Naruto learned the Rasengan, a jutsu created by the 4th Hokage, in under a week. Something that took me over a month to do. And he's taken it and expanded it into ways that the Yondaime didn't have time to. He looked right at Choji and said, "You're lucky that he didn't use a stronger variant of it, kid. If not, you'd probably be a paraplegic right now." Choji paled as he realized that he was very lucky to be alive right now, especially if Naruto was as tough as they said. Jiraiya then looked Kakashi right in the eye and said, "What was it you always say, Kakashi? Those who abandon their comrades are scum. Well, I guess we know where you stand in Naruto's eyes and mine." He then gave a very intimidating look. "Well, at least you'll have to deal with one less piece of dead weight," he said. Before a response could be made, the door opened, revealing Tsunade. "Jiraiya, we need to talk," the slug princess said. Jiraiya left the room and joined Tsunade and Inoichi. "What is it?" he asked, sounding annoyed. Inoichi answered, "Before I explain, I have to ask, what was Naruto's mental state and what was the condition of his seal?" Jiraiya looked puzzled at the question, but he answered, "Naruto's mental health shouldn't have come into question. Despite everything that happened, he is mentally sound. As for the seal, over the training trip, I did attempt to loosen the seal a bit to allow Naruto a bit more access to the Kyuubi's chakra." Upon seeing the shocked, and horrified, looks on the pair's faces, he quickly added, "But that proved to be a huge mistake and I quickly returned the seal to its original state." Shock and horror were replaced with relief. "What does this have to do with Naruto?" the white-haired pervert asked. Inoichi answered, "I went through the memories of the retrieval team, especially when Danzo gave them the orders to go after Naruto, as well as the mission itself. Apparently, Danzo told them about Naruto's status as a Jinchuriki and told them that his seal was failing, causing him to become more violent and unpredictable." The two Sannin snarled at Danzo's manipulation. "However, there is something else. When he gave the orders, I felt something nagging at my mind, or rather their minds. I think Danzo may have cast a subtle genjutsu to influence them to go after Naruto. On top of that, Naruto kept talking about him being set up." Jiraiya rubbed his chin in though. Something wasn't right here. The fact that Danzo seemed to be at the center of all this didn't seem to be a coincidence. That old war dog had been trying to get Naruto turned into the village's personal weapon for years. He wouldn't put it past the half-mummy to conspire with others to make Naruto look like a bad guy. He wasn't the only one who was thinking that. Tsunade had suspicions about Danzo. Ever since she came to the village, he and her advisors had been talking to her about trying to get Naruto to be brought under Danzo's wing. She heard about his methods years ago and it made her sick. Could he really have conspired something against Naruto behind her back? And if he did, who was involved and how far did it go? Tsunade said, "Go through everything you can. See if you can figure out what Danzo was planning and why. The daimyo is coming tomorrow, and I want to have something solid against that old mummy. You work with him, Jiraiya, and no research." The two nodded and walked off, ready to start investigating. Tsunade rubbed her temples at the oncoming migraine. With Naruto and Merlin, Naruto was currently sitting in what could be described a small room. It contained a bed, a hollow screen for movies and games, if necessary, and a few other necessary items. Merlin had informed Naruto that this was where he was staying. The blonde boy had gotten a rather nice tour of the facility Merlin had brought him to. Naruto was shocked to learn that the base was on the moon. When Naruto expressed doubt, Merlin showed him by opening a shutter that revealed the planet to him. A sight that captivated Naruto as he got to see just how beautiful the world was. Naruto was then shown Merlin's lab, which had technology both military and medical, that would make certain people in his village green with envy. He also showed Naruto a small production facility that produced his battle drones. When Naruto looked confused, Merlin explained that drones were essentially puppets that could move on their own. There was also a kitchen that had various food from Earth, harvested by multiple small drones. To help with the freshness, the base actually came with a biological chamber which allowed them to grow their own food, multiple vegetable, and even meat samples from various planets. Something that made Naruto drool. One of his favorite rooms, however, was the map room. The chamber had a large map that showed most of the universe, which, apparently, the Galvan won in a card game. Naruto was shocked that so many planets, so many species lived in the universe. It made Naruto feel small, and it made him sit down to process it all. The last place that Naruto was shown was the training room. A gigantic chamber that, using special hard light hologram technology, could mimic anywhere in the universe. Naruto was drooling at the thought of training there. Naruto was even more shocked when Merlin said that the technology here was considered below par on his home planet. It turns out, Merlin could have made a larger, better base, but he didn't have the resources to do so due to his banishment, and because, as he stated earlier, his people were very picky about who got their technology. At the exact moment, Naruto was fiddling with the remote to the holoscreen, getting frustrated that he couldn't turn the alien device on. The sound of a door opening got the boy's attention and he saw Merlin enter in on his flying disc. "Dinner is almost ready," he said, "I just threw you might want to know." Naruto got up and was following the miniature alien out the door. As they walked, Naruto asked something. "So how exactly do you intend to do to me?" Merlin looked back and said, "Well, I have a few plans, but first, we have to get you healthy." Naruto looked confused. Merlin answered, "You only started eating healthy after your nearly 3-year training trip. We have over a decade of malnutrition to make up for. After that, we'll work on your skills as a shinobi. I have a few plans for that. Then we'll get to the alien stuff. Besides, you may need a bit of time to get used to some of the new technology, if the holoscreen is anything to go by." Naruto grumbled something under his breath and followed the minuscule alien to the dining area. A whole new chapter in Naruto's life was about to begin, and he couldn't wait. Meanwhile, several million miles away, another Galvan raised his head from his workbench. He had a distinct feeling something big was coming in the future. And he couldn't wait. The mood was tense as the clan heads entered the council chambers. Each member was silent as they entered the room. Even the normally lazy Shikaku Nara had a serious look on his normally bored face. Each member quickly took their seats at the half-circle table and began to wait in tense silence. The clan heads didn't know why they had been called here, but it was apparently serious as the civilian council members had not been invited. Curiously, the only civilian present was Mebuki Haruno. After a few moments, the silence was broken when the doors opened. They saw Tsunade and Jiraiya, holding a large folder in his hands, walked into the room, both looking incredibly serious. Soon after was another man. The man was old and thin with round eyes and dark pupils. He wore a headpiece that consisted of a gray band around his forehead and a dark blue cloth framing his head, reaching his shoulders. The rest of him was covered in royal, expensive-looking robes. This was the daimyo of Fire Country, Ozai. Flanking him were 2 samurai guards, and a third man. He wore white and dark purple robes, with the Yamanaka clan symbol on his back, and had blonde hair and blue eyes. His name was not known to the members of the council, but he was clearly here at the daimyo's behest. The 3 walked across the room. Ozai took his spot at a podium at the front of the table, and took a seat. Jiraiya and Tsunade approached the man. "First, before we begin, are all the members here?" the daimyo inquired, looking around with a blank expression, seeing no empty seats. "Are any of the clan heads being substituted today?" Upon receiving "No," for an answer, the daimyo spoke. "Good," the daimyo said. "Now, you are probably all wondering why you have been called here today. Tsunade, please explain." Tsunade nodded and said, "Before we begin, I have something to announce. As of 2 days ago, the civilian council has been disbanded as they have shown they have been unable to keep secrets or remain unbiased in certain situations. As she has shown maturity, and the ability to see past her own issues, I have allowed Mebuki Haruno to sit in as a single counselor who shall remain in charge of civilian matters." The woman smiled thankfully at the woman. She had seen how out of control and arrogant the civilian council was beforehand, and she had a feeling if it kept up something very stupid was going to happen. The ninja council members all nodded in understanding as they had seen that Mebuki was capable of remaining unbiased and acted as a gray area in these times. Tsunade continued, "Moving on, The first matter is the sentencing of Sasuke Uchiha. The second is the running away of Naruto Uzumaki. The daimyo nodded and said, "After looking through all the evidence, I am surprised that this has been allowed to go on. I have read up on Sasuke Uchiha with the information given to me by the various reports found across the village. He had been already marked a flight risk before his desertion. In accordance for his crimes, Sasuke Uchiha shall be stripped of his ninja rank, have all information from the Hidden Sound village extracted, and any information involving Konoha wiped. After having his chakras sealed, he shall be sentenced to life in the blood prison. Upon doing so, his assets shall be liquidated." This brought a few nods from the group. Sasuke was an asset, sure, but the boy was an obvious flight risk and he was obviously mentally unstable. It was clear that something needed to be done. Mebuki knew she was going to be getting an earful from her husband, but she didn't care. Tsunade said, "With that matter taken care of, we shall move on to the matter of Naruto Uzumaki." Sume suddenly said, "If you are ready to bring him back to face trial, I can send out some of my best trackers on your orders, Tsunade-sama." Tsunade nodded and said, "While I thank you, Natsume, we have a more pressing matter to deal with involving Naruto Uzumaki, besides his defection." There was a moment of confusion from everyone, except for Inoichi, who nodded in understanding. Tsunade continued, "We have come to believe that there was a conspiracy put in place that would have Naruto Uzumaki expelled from the village on false charges. A conspiracy that some of your children may have unknowingly participated in." This was greeted with looks of surprise from the council and outrage from some of the more brazen ones, namely Sume. "My son Kiba would never willingly betray one of his comrades," she shouted. "Loyalty is something that is hardwired into every member of the Inuzuka clan." Similar shouts came up from the clan heads defending their children. The daimyo banged his gavel, causing the chatter to die down. He said, "We are not here to accuse blame. Thanks to the investigative skills of Inoichi Yamanaka and Jiraiya, we have found proof that they did not willingly take part in this conspiracy. We also believe that we have those in charge of this conspiracy as well." This resulted in a series of mumbles from the group. The fact that a conspiracy had been set up in the infrastructure of their own village. The daimyo then stood up and said, "Bring in the accused." The doors to the tribunal opened and someone was guided in. The figure was wrapped tightly in chains covered, decked out in special chakra suppression seals. His hands were cuffed with special cuffs that kept his hands apart, and put metal lines between his fingers to prevent him from using hand signs for techniques. Standing in front and back of him were 2 anbu each, for a total of 4. All of them were ready to execute the man should he move in a way they don't like. After being brought in, Danzo was pushed by the anbu to his knees. The sight of the Hokage's advisor down on his knees and in chains shocked the clan heads as they looked on with shock. It made them incredibly nervous as they realized that this conspiracy was high up in Konoha's power structure. Tsunade didn't allow herself to smile, but she felt a large amount of achievement at seeing the man who attempted to have her godson charged and arrested, while the traitorous Uchiha went free. Flashback, 3 days ago. Tsunade sat in her chair as he drummed her fingers on her desk, feeling a bit nervous. Why wouldn't she be nervous? She was about to go into a deep battle of politics with the daimyo to determine the future freedom of her godson. She, Inoichi, and Jiraiya had spent many hours trying to get the information needed. She went through various mission reports, with Jiraiya sending out word to his spy network to contact the clients who had paid for the missions, which was rather easy thanks to the smaller summons he used. Inoichi had gone through every member of the Konoha teams, even the sensei, to help get their perspective of the missions, at least the ones they were on. The members of each team were quick to point out the inconsistencies in the mission reports. Well, except Sakura when it came to the wave mission, as she, along with Kakashi, hadn't witnessed much due to the mist at the time and being stuck guarding Tazuna. The 3 were shocked to find that the mission reports that they found were altered, showing Sasuke to be an exemplary ninja, Sakura to be above average, and Naruto to be, in summation, dead weight. They originally suspected Kakashi, but after comparing his handwriting from some recent paperwork, having been framed by a teacher at the time, to commemorate the time. After realizing minor differences in the writing that couldn't be done by Kakashi, they believed they had enough evidence to put him out of suspicion. They would have gone into more detail on who was dirty, but they had to bring enough evidence to convince the daimyo, and they didn't have the time. She discreetly glanced out the corner of her eye at Danzo, Homura, and Kaharu. The trio were currently in their office waiting for the daimyo to arrive as well, no doubt to bombard him with Naruto's trumped-up charges and false evidence. While Danzo hid his well, the other two held a level of smugness about them that told her that they thought they hadn't been exposed. Tsunade took another breath to calm herself, before the intercom on her desk fired up. "Lady Tsunade," the voice of the secretary said, "the daimyo has arrived." Tsunade let out a breath to calm her nerves and said, "Let him enter." The door opened to reveal the daimyo flanked by two of his personal ninja guards, wearing the familiar garb of the ninja guardians. Though she couldn't see them, she could only guess that the others were currently moving around the tower just in case. "Lord Daimyo," Tsunade said with a respectful tone, "I welcome you to our village, but I wish it were under much better circumstances." The daimyo nodded and said, "I understand that this matter is of the utmost importance, especially given how it revolves around the security of my ninja village." Tsunade nodded before she turned towards the three advisors and said, "You three, out." The three advisors looked shocked at Tsunade's sudden dismissal of the two did not sit well with them. "Lady Tsunade," Danzo said as he tried to convince her to let him stay, but she cut him off, with a cold icy tone that left room for no argument. "Danzo Shimura, I don't know who you think you were given what you pulled a few days ago, but I will not allow you to try to undermine my authority again. Now, you and the other advisors can get up and leave. This is a very important matter and I don't want any unnecessary information getting out." Homura and Kaharu looked upset, and Danzo didn't say anything, his years of mental training keeping him from showing his annoyance. He began to focus his chakra into his hidden Sharingan eye, putting suggestions in the woman's head. However, after discovering the use of genjutsu on the members of Konoha, Jiraiya and Tsunade had come prepared. Under her desk, Tsunade applied some chakra to a seal that was hidden from view. A special anti-genjutsu seal that Jiraiya had developed. "I told you to get out," Tsunade said just as firmly. If Danzo was surprised, he didn't show it. He simply frowned and walked out followed by the other elders. The daimyo's guards eyed the group curiously and were making sure that the two old men and old woman left the office and stayed out. As the door shut, the daimyo turned towards the remaining trio in the room. "I am surprised that you have gotten rid of your advisor Tsunade," the daimyo said, curiosity clear in his tone. Tsunade answered, "I trust him as far as I could throw him." Jiraiya stepped forward and said, "Lord Daimyo, you are aware of the situation involving Sasuke Uchiha and Naruto Uzumaki, correct?" Daimyo nodded and said, "Yes, I was told that the Uchiha boy had returned from an S-rank mission to spy on the Hidden Sound village and was attacked by his former teammate Naruto Uzumaki. Now I hear that the same boy has deserted the village." Tsunade sighed and said, "Lord Daimyo, there was no mission to spy on the Sound village." The old man looked shocked upon hearing that. Using the silence as a chance to continue, Jiraiya said, "First of all, Sasuke was considered a flight risk by the Sandaime before his passing. Following being given a curse seal, he willingly left the village to join Orochimaru in the Hidden Sound village." Jiraiya then proceeded to hand the man a folder. The daimyo took it and skimmed through the various papers. He was surprised to read that multiple things in the files did not match up with what was sent to him. Inoichi continued where Jiraiya left off, saying, "We have learned recently the psychologist who was put in charge of Sasuke's mental evaluations had been bribed into keeping Sasuke's mental state a secret. Apparently, Sasuke was horribly traumatized by the death of his family." The daimyo was shocked as he was shifting through the papers. He found a bunch of financial papers that had the name of the psychologist. There were some rather large amounts of money sent in, on dates that lined up with the dates of the evaluations. Inoichi continued, "After realizing the corruption, I went through Sasuke's mind myself. He suffers from a massive inferiority and superiority complex, as well as PTSD, after being trapped in a powerful genjutsu by his brother Itachi when he left the village." The daimyo went through the papers and was shocked about this. The papers he had been given were completely wrong. Sasuke wasn't some prince who was given a great mission, he was a traitor and a liar. However, he was also curious about something. "What about that Uzumaki boy?" Ozai asked, with a raised eyebrow, "How does he fit into this?" Jiraiya said, "I can answer that for you. You see, Naruto was considered the dead last of his class. However, that was not due to a lack of talent, but rather bias towards him. Naruto, it turns out, had rather large reserves of chakra. Far more than what a normal academy student should have. The teachers didn't realize this immediately and labeled him a lost cause. At one point, I myself started training Naruto and I found that the boy was a diamond in the rough. The daimyo was now going through a few more of the papers. He found the mission reports that praised Naruto for the work he did, as well as an observation from Jiraiya of Naruto's skills and abilities. He had to admit, despite not being a ninja, that Naruto's accomplishments were quite impressive even though people didn't seem to want to train him for being a lost cause. He also compared them to the fake reports and was immediately able to pick out the biased words and fake praise of the Uchiha boy. The daimyo then turned towards the trio and said, "Why would they do this? Why such blatant favoritism?" Jiraiya answered, "We aren't entirely sure. At this point we can only speculate that the civilians, and some of our shinobi, show favoritism towards Sasuke for his status as an Uchiha clan member. Some of them probably think that by getting in Sasuke's good graces, he would repay them in kind in the future." The daimyo nodded. He had seen some people treat the nobles and wealthy in the capital better than some others. However, there was one last thing that had him concerned. "And the Uzumaki boy?" he asked. "Why would they hold such a grudge against him?" Tsunade sighed and said, "Naruto Uzumaki is the jailer of the nine-tailed fox." The daimyo looked surprised at this and was shocked. He had heard through some members of his court that the nine-tailed Jinchuriki was amongst the Leaf Village. The thought of Naruto turning that massive beast upon the village in revenge made him break out into a cold sweat. Tsunade quickly saw the look on his face and quickly added, "Inoichi did a mental evaluation a while back. He was mentally sound. However, we have found that there may have been a conspiracy to frame Naruto for assaulting Sasuke, possibly attempting to murder him, sending Naruto to prison and getting off with a slap on the wrist." The color returned to the man's face as they realized the threat of the nine tails wasn't present. However, the word conspiracy immediately made a deadly serious expression come up to the older man's face. "What conspiracy?" he asked. Jiraiya answered, "Between the faked mission reports we discovered, I did a mental evaluation on the retrieval team to get some clear images on what happened. In their memories, I sensed a genjutsu, a very discreet one, being put on them to make them go after Naruto. All of this centered around one person, Danzo Shimura." Flashback end. Tsunade smirked to herself as she saw Danzo pushed down to his knees. After giving him their evidence, Ozai had given the 3 days to get the evidence they needed. With many Yamanaka, after making sure they weren't in Danzo's pocket, found out some very interesting things about Danzo. They found out that Danzo had either bribed, blackmailed, or just straight up owned several people in the records department, allowing them to fake mission reports. They also found that the Uzumaki clan had been wiped out from the village historical records, which seriously pissed the blonde Cage off. Knowing that Homura and Kaharu were somehow involved, the two advisors were taken to the INT department. Depending on who they were, some of them were difficult and others caved in immediately knowing the jig was up in exchange for a lighter sentence, or just to get out from under Danzo's thumb. They also found out that Homura and Kaharu had a part in this conspiracy. Almost immediately, and very discreetly, the two elders were placed under our arrest with their assets being seized. The daimyo looked at the man and said, "Danzo Shimura, you have been brought before this tribunal to face the following charges: conspiracy against a ninja of Konoha, conspiracy to commit treason, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. How do you plead?" Danzo looked up to the daimyo and answered, "Not guilty." The daimyo answered, "The defendant has pled not guilty. Let the record show this." The rest of the council muttered amongst themselves. The daimyo continued, "You may say you are innocent, but we have plenty of evidence that go to the contrary." The man listed all the evidence provided by the trio's investigations and examinations. Obviously, the council was shocked at what they heard. They too had taken the words of the academy instructors at face value when it came to the grades. Many of them were smacking themselves for not realizing that there would be some prejudice and anger towards the boy for his burden. They were also shocked that Danzo managed to pull off all of this. Danzo was shocked to find that many of his dirty dealings had been exposed. While they were recent, they were unable to get anything damning from the past, thankfully. However, if their investigation continued, it would only be a matter of time before that happened. You have heard the evidence, the daimyo said. Do you have anything to say in your defense, Danzo Shimura? Danzo looked up at the daimyo, realizing that the jig was up. He growled, I did this for Konoha. Tsunade scoffed and said, working to have an innocent boy banished, or worse, and have a traitor pardoned? How is that for the good of Konoha? Danzo answered, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was becoming too powerful. The Jinchuriki was meant to be our village's main defense against the other villages, and by holding the most powerful of the tailed beast, makes him our most powerful weapon. Inoichi asked, and what does the Uchiha play into this? With a huff, Danzo answered, I don't have to explain everything to you. History will know that I am right. The Jinchuriki were made to be weapons of war, and they should have remained weapons of war. Jiraiya snarled, and you wonder why the second didn't nominate you for the title of Hokage. Danzo's exposed glared hatefully at Jiraiya, while his hidden Sharingan eye burned as he wished to use it. You are a sentimental fool, Jiraiya. You were brainwashed by Sarutobi's bleeding heart. His notions of peace made this village weak. With the Nine Tails as our personal weapon, we would have wiped out the other villages, leaving Konoha at the top of the world, where it should be. To the others, Danzo sounded like a patriot gone mad. He was not winning any allies here or anywhere else in the room. I have heard enough, the daimyo said. You have heard the evidence. What is your judgment? Those who find him guilty. Practically every hand raised in the room. Innocent? No hands were raised. The verdict is set. Danzo Shimura, you are hereby found guilty of all charges. You are to be sentenced to death tomorrow at 10 a.m. Court adjourned. Despite the setback, Danzo didn't go into a tangent like many of them expected. He was guided out of the room, not very gently, by the guards. He held his head high with dignity, at least the dignity a man condemned to die had. I'm glad that matter is settled, the daimyo said. Now on to our next matter. The issue involving Sasuke Uchiha. As he said this, Mebuki Haruno stood up and asked, Daimyo-sama, permission to speak? The old man turned towards the woman and said, permission granted, Lady Haruno. The woman said, I understand that the boy committed treason, and the punishment for that is execution. Is there a reason he is being allowed to live? Also, do we tell this information to the rest of the village? The woman wasn't trying to keep the treacherous boy alive, she had merely pointing out a fact. She knew herself how the members of the village practically praised the ground the Uchiha walked on because of his status as a member of one of Konoha's founding clans. If the Uchiha was executed, there would likely be a riot, which could put people in danger. The daimyo said, I understand your concerns, Lady Haruno. However, this is not up for discussion. Inoichi, please share with us what you learned from the Uchiha's mind. Inoichi stepped forward and said, first, Sasuke Uchiha was not kidnapped as many of the civilians would like to believe. He left willingly. After examining the memories of that mission from the retrieval team members, Choji Akamichi, Rock Lee, Neji Hyuga, Shikimaru Nara, and Kiba Inuzuka, we learned that Sasuke had apparently gone for power, as he was seen, by Rock Lee, briefly in a transformed state like the members of the now deceased Sound Ninja. The members of the Shinobi Council were mumbling amongst themselves. After hearing that, it was obvious that the Uchiha was a traitor to the village, especially since he went to that monster Orochimaru. Mebuki Haruno sighed mentally from her seat. She had heard of how Sasuke was some prodigy amongst the remains of his clan, but she didn't see it. When her daughter was growing up, she had heard of how he was some great student, and it seemed that was true. However, she saw him and how cold he was. It honestly made her afraid of what would happen if he did marry her daughter. Now she just hoped that what happened after this would snap her daughter out of this love-struck fool phase she was in. Inoichi continued, also by examining Sasuke's most recent memories, I learned that the tales of Naruto accessing the Kyuubi's chakra was in fact true, but it was only after Sasuke willingly activated his curse seal. Naruto's fight was clearly a fight to survive, not an attempt to murder him like Danzo tried to make it look like. The daimyo nodded and said, in light of this, I believe death would be too swift for him, that is why I am having him sent to the blood prison. However, I understand many of you are for the usual punishment of execution. The council members were split on the punishment at this point. While many of them wanted Sasuke to be executed, they could also see the reason for this. Sasuke, like many an Uchiha before him, prided himself on his Sharingan. Doing this would no doubt be a far more fitting punishment and could see the reasons. The daimyo said, with that in mind we shall bring it to a vote. All for Sasuke Uchiha's execution? Sume and Mebuki both raised their hands. Now those set for life imprisonment? Hiashi, Shibi, Inoichi, Shuza, and Shikaku all raised their hands. The daimyo said, the motion is carried. Sasuke shall be placed in Hazuka Castle for the rest of his days. Inoichi Yamanaka, you're to immediately begin scouring Sasuke Uchiha's mind. Pull every secret from the Sound Village and wipe out all things he knows from Konoha. Are there any other matters we must discuss? It was at this point that Hiashi asked, what is to be done about the Uzumaki boy? Is he to be put in the bingo book? The daimyo said, after looking things over, it was decided that Naruto fled out of fear for his own safety. He will not be put in the bingo book as he has performed no great crime. However, if he should be encountered, the shinobi should attempt to reason with him and convince him to return. We must keep this quiet, however, as we cannot let the other villages get wind that we have lost our Jinchuriki. The others nodded in understanding. It was clear Naruto left because he believed that there was no other way to get away from those who wanted to control him and had sent the group of ninjas after him. Plus, without their resident Jinchuriki, the phrase sounding odd on their tongues, some of the other villages might become emboldened. As the group filed out, they didn't notice that they had an unwanted visitor. Up in the corner of the room, a small object sat on the corner, hidden from view. The object was spider-like in shape and had a large camera set up on its back. The camera was on a ball joint, allowing it to move around. It was also camouflaged, making it appear invisible. Back on the moon with Merlin and Naruto. The main screen in Merlin's base showed the image of the trial to the Galvan and human. Naruto just stared in shock at seeing the trial and was surprised to see Tsunade take charge of things alongside the daimyo, Jiraiya, and Inoichi. And they say there isn't anything good on TV these days, Merlin mumbled as he took a bite out of what looked like a bug. I figured out about the trial through my spy drones. I had a feeling you would want to watch, Naruto. The blonde in turn nodded and asked, thanks. At least I know that not everyone turned on me. There is one thing I don't understand though. Why would that Danzo guy try this? I mean, I know that a lot of people hate me because of the furball, but why? Merlin sighed and said, truth be told, it is hard to understand motives. In Danzo's case, it was for power. He saw a chance for his village to become great and eternal with the power of the Nine Tails and he went with it. Damn whatever consequences there might have been. You need to understand that there are people like that, Naruto. Those who will throw away their comrades and allies for power, money, or any number of things. But worse are those who have no meaning behind their actions. They only want to watch the world burn. Naruto shuddered at the thought, and nodded. Orochimaru had experimented on humans to get power and betrayed his village. Sasuke joined him in his quest for revenge. Danzo had been a puppet master. So, what does this mean for you, boy? Merlin asked. Do you intend to return to your village now that you know that Danzo was behind it all? Naruto sighed and said, I don't know, Keiru-sensei. After everything that's happened, I don't know if I should go back to Konoha or not. The amphibian alien nodded and said, don't worry, Naruto. When the time comes, you'll know what to do, and don't call me Keiru. Naruto chuckled a bit at the alien and took a bite out of the bar he was eating. Naruto immediately blanched and gagged slightly. He looked the bar over and said, I know these bars are supposed to be nutritious, but do they have to taste so bad? Merlin moved towards his own meal and said, well, if you have problems with that, maybe you should have some of mine. Upon seeing a collection of what appeared to be dried up old bugs, Naruto immediately denied it. No thanks, I'm good, Naruto said quickly before taking another bite out of the awful tasting bar. Naruto mentally wept and thought, I miss Ichiraku. Naruto grunted as he pushed up a heavy set of dumbbells, weighed a good amount greater than what a normal human could lift. He was currently shirtless with a good amount of sweat forming on his body, showing off the good amount of muscle his body had gained from both his life as a ninja, and from his training with the banished Galvan. In the 5 months that had passed, Naruto had undergone a strict diet, mostly consisting of those horrible nutrient bars, as well as a strict physical training, including weights, cardio, and all kinds of physical exercises. When Naruto wasn't training with his body, he was training with his mind. Naruto was put in front of a computer that would help train his strategic thinking, memory, and other parts of his brain. At times Merlin would combine these with a special training room that allowed him to combine the two. However, it was somewhat limited due to a lack of resources on Merlin's part. However, he had plenty of drones for Naruto to spar against. Another change was Naruto's training in chakra and jutsu. Using the same cameras used to spy on the trail of Danzo, Merlin used them to spy on the training of certain members of certain villages, using what they scanned for their training to add to Naruto's training. Naruto also managed to learn a few extra techniques from the hidden water, hidden sand, and hidden cloud villages. There was also a slight problem that had come up with the whole alien thing. Some of the technology went right over Naruto's head and left him very confused. Naruto was also introduced to powerful weapons and tools that could rival certain jutsu and could cause a lot of damage. It also helped hammer home just how small in the universe that his species were. Naruto let out a grunt as he led down. Naruto set down his weights. Grabbing what looked like a canteen, he drank the cold liquid, feeling the refreshing beverage go down his throat, quenching his thirst. Naruto, the voice of Merlin said, over the intercom system. Come down to the lab, please. I have some things I want to show you. Naruto stood up, dried himself off with a towel, and put on a shirt. He then exited the exercise room and walked down the corridor. After a few minutes, he arrived at the banished Galvan's lab. The former member of Konoha entered the lab. The lab itself wasn't as impressive as some of the flashier ones around the universe. There were a few tables filled with different gadgets and experiments that the man had been working on. There were a few other things, including a refrigerator-like device, no doubt for storing chemicals and other things needed to be kept cool. There were also several warnings on the object, reading, danger, and do not touch, and a more recently added one read, this includes you, Naruto. Naruto rolled his eyes. He turned to the side and finally landed his eyes on Merlin. The banished Galvan was currently sitting at a computer, typing as fast as his tiny hands could, numbers, equations, and all kinds of technical mumbo-jumbo reflected in his eyes. He was mumbling to himself, making sure that everything would go perfectly for what was about to transpire. As the Galvan was completely entranced in his work, Naruto glanced around. Nearby the computer that the man was typing on, there was a type of bed, resembling what looked like a high-tech tanning bed. Naruto glanced in another direction and saw Merlin's workbench. There were several items and objects on it that looked incredibly sophisticated. Naruto saw a glass ball hooked up to his bunch of wires with a hand in it. Occasionally, the wires would flash with electricity and the hand would morph. First become covered in orange fur, with thick black claws, then turning rough and red, and then turning into sharp dark brown and covered in scales. Naruto removed his eyes from the strange sight at a few other things. Naruto saw what looked like the beginning of a gauntlet, primarily black with a few pieces of orange here and there. There were also a few devices that resembled the grenades that he had seen used, a few high-tech guns, knives, and swords. They all looked half-finished, however. Before Naruto could finish his examination, the sound of a throat being cleared got his attention. He turned around to see Merlin looking at him with a quirked eyebrow. Are you done? He asked. Naruto shrugged and said, Hey, excuse me if I'm a bit curious. I've never been allowed in your lab before. Merlin sighed and said, those aren't finished. So, please, don't touch anything at all. Naruto nodded. While in his stay, Merlin had shown him a few times when greatly advanced technology wound up in the hands of species that were considered to have low-level technology. He had seen people incinerated by their own weapons, and Naruto decided that it would be best to leave all the tinkering to the alien genius. So, what did you call me down for here, boss? Naruto asked, crossing his arms. Merlin answered, Naruto, over the past few months, you've improved a good amount, and you've adapted well to the technology I have here. As such, I believe it is time for the next step. Merlin went over the computer and punched in a few keys. After a few moments, the image of a small machine appeared. It looked like a ball, glowing dark blue, with a few black pegs coming out of it. What is that? Naruto asked, slightly confused, and in wonderment. These, Merlin answered, are nanites, or if you want to use a different name, nanobots. These are microscopic machines, so small that even a huge colony of millions would be hard to see. It is these machines that will make you a greater warrior. Naruto looked incredibly interested. How is that? Naruto asked. Merlin smiled and said, these nanites shall be injected into your body. Once inside, they will begin the process of enhancing your body. Your strength will be greater, faster, it may even affect your chakra system, making it stronger, if I am correct. According to my numbers, it should even increase those regenerative powers, of course. Naruto looked excited for a moment, then he thought of something. What about the fox? What if it wound up becoming stronger? Naruto immediately flashed back to when Jiraiya tried messing with the seal during their training trip. His memories of what happened that day after the seal was loosened, but the outcome was clear as day. Jiraiya had multiple second-degree burns, some bordering on third-degree burns, a few broken ones, and was suffering from chakra exhaustion. Naruto himself had suffered from several burns. Naruto remembered walking past the field where it happened. There were several knocked-over trees, craters, and scorched earth. Merlin saw his scared face and immediately added, judging by how the seal separates your chakra from the 9 tails, there shouldn't be any effect on the 9 tails. Naruto let out a sigh of relief. However, there is another feature, Merlin said with a smile. These nanites are connected to a special system that regulates the various DNA that I have connected over the years. With these, you will be able to transform yourself into various alien species. Naruto whistled and said, wow. So how does this work? Do you just take a needle and inject me or something? Merlin lost his smile and answered, unfortunately, no. If you were a human of Earth this would be that easy. However, the nanites will need time to adjust to your body. They will need time to adjust your personal chakra network as well as your DNA. By my calculations, this process, while painless, will take a long time. Naruto blinked and asked, how long exactly? Merlin answered, by my calculations, 12 hours. Naruto blinked and asked, 12 hours? With all the advanced technology, I thought this wouldn't take so long. Merlin answered, well, this may be advanced by your standards, however, by Galvan standards it is pretty behind. Naruto sighed as he reminded, once again, that Merlin was not at the height of his technological prowess. So, what do I have to do? Naruto asked, raising an eyebrow. The diminutive genius smiled and said, well, all you have to do is lay down in the pod here. He motioned to the machine that resembled a tanning bed. He continued, once you lay down, the device will put you to sleep and the nanites will be injected into the body. Naruto nodded and said, okay, let's do it. The pod opened revealing an interior, with a spot hollowed out in the shape of a human body. The inside of it looked like circuitry, with a glowing green color, with black and gold lines running through it. Naruto laid down into the pod. The lid shut, and a bright glow filled Naruto's vision. Outside of the pod, Merlin went over to his computer and began typing into the various numbers and commands. Inside the pod, Naruto felt his consciousness waver, and he finally fell asleep. Merlin then continued typing. The screen showed a shape of a human body, outlined in green, and slowly filling up with a bright green color. Subject: Naruto Uzumaki. Consciousness diminishing. 80%, 50%, 10%. Consciousness reduced. Beginning nanite infusion. Scanning systems. Probability of error, within permissible limits. Commencing nanite infusion. As this was shown, it showed a timer, revealing a clock. 11 hours 59 minutes and 39 seconds, indicating 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 39 seconds. The diminutive scientist sighed and said, okay, now I just need to pass the time. He walked over to another fridge. This one had a sticker with the word, food, written on it. He reached in and pulled out a jar full of, what looked like, cockroaches and canned drink, just the right size for him. He walked over to his lab table. He sat up, popped open the can, taking a sip, and then munched on a roach before he began setting to work. He had 12 hours and he was going to use it. On the planet's surface, Konoha. Tsunade sighed as she finished up a set of paperwork. She leaned back in her chair, allowing the sense of accomplishment to wash over her. After a few moments, she turned and looked out the window over her village. It had been 5 months since Naruto left the village, leaving behind his friends and comrades. To her, and several others, after Naruto left it was like there was a cloud over the village, like a large ray of sunshine had been blocked off. Despite the peaceful way the village looked, a lot of people looked like they were walking on eggshells, and for good reasons. A reason that had happened, a few days after Naruto left. Flashback begin, 4 months, and 29 days ago. Tsunade stood above the bound form of Danzo. Nearby was Jiraiya, who stood nearby, glaring at the war hawk who had conspired against the village's resident prankster and diamond in the rough. They were currently in the arena that was normally used for the Chunin exam finals. The villagers were currently watching with rapt attention. The members of the shinobi clans had serious looks on their faces, especially the members of the Konoha rookies, who had been under the old man's genjutsu. The civilians, however, were confused as to why one of the Hokage's personal advisors was currently in chains. People of Konoha, Tsunade announced, a small microphone on her ear. We have gathered here today to witness to the execution of Danzo Shimura, for acts and conspiracy to commit treason against the village of Konoha. Whispers of shock and surprise ran through the villagers who weren't part of Danzo's trial. Up in the stands, Kazashi Haruno feigned surprise. He had a feeling something was wrong when his wife was called in for a council meeting and he was not. Immediately, he began an operation, putting up a few people as patsies so that he would get off without being noticed. Thankfully, with all the other people being secretly taken down for crimes against Konoha, it worked. He was currently sitting next to his wife and daughter, both of which seemed glad to hear the news. Tsunade stood before the man and said, "Any last words before you meet your maker?" Danzo spat and said, "Everything I have done was for the good of Konoha. The 9 tails was meant to be our weapon, and you foolishly lost him because of your bleeding heart. You are just as pathetic as that fool, Hiruzen." Unfortunately, the statement about the village's resident Jinchuriki was heard and a small uprising began in the village. This is all about the demon brat? The kid should have been given to Danzo years ago. She's killing a patriot of the village because of some brat. Other such calls came up from those who were blinded by prejudice towards the boy, but were not part of the conspiracy. The only member of the conspiracy who wasn't talking was Kazashi, who knew it would be best to keep quiet. The shinobi members of the village were currently. Jiraiya stepped up, a microphone like Tsunade's on his head, and yelled, "Shut up." The sound of the shout, plus the enraged look on his face. "You know, over the past few days, I've gathered a lot of information on what has been going on around this village, and I am beyond sickened with how my village has fallen. Seeing as you all seem to live in your own personal bubbles when it comes to reality, it is time to finally pop it." Those listening were now surprised, and a sudden feeling of nervousness flooded the arena. Jiraiya said, the supposed failure was sabotaged early on by teachers who wished to keep him weak and malleable. As for the potential to lose control, here is a little bit of information you should all know. The only way for a Jinchuriki to be influenced by the beast sealed inside of him, is for his mind to break. In other words, if he had been given to Danzo like you're all so blindly suggest, there was a good chance the little self-fulfilling prophecy you all made would come true. Many of the civilians all looked shocked at this information. In the stands, Iruka suddenly realized why many of his co-workers hadn't shown up for work the past couple of days. He also felt guilty as he realized he had allowed his own prejudice blind him when it. Jiraiya continued, "As for your precious Sasuke, he is being hauled off to prison. And before you say anything, we checked his mind, and he had no intention of ever returning to the village. There is also the fact that he suffered from severe PTSD, that resulted in his currently mentality. Something that the elders kept from the populace, so they could push forward their agendas." Looks of absolute surprise went through the villagers. Many who were hoping to have the Uchiha wed their daughters, but weren't part of the conspiracy, were suddenly filled with dread, at the thought of Sasuke being anywhere near their daughters. Jiraiya then decided to go ahead and pop the final bubble they had surrounding them. He glanced at Tsunade with a questioning expression. She nodded. As for Naruto being an orphan, he said, he is no such thing. His full name was Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Everyone in the village looked shocked upon hearing that. Everyone recognized the name of their beloved Yondaime, and many of them were now kicking themselves for not noticing it before. Mebuki groaned in frustration as she now realized the name. She didn't associate Naruto with her old friend as he had blonde hair, and now she was kicking herself for not realizing it sooner. He even had the same verbal tick. Down in the arena, Tsunade felt that Danzo's execution had been held off long enough and walked forward. Chakra formed around her fist as she raised it into the air. Without a moment of hesitation, she brought her fists down with earth-shaking strength. When the ground stopped shaking, Danzo's body wasn't even recognizable. However, a gasp of shock ran through those present as his body faded into mist, leaving only the bindings that were used to hold him. Jiraiya's danger sense went off, just in time as a large group of Anbu, all wearing blank masks. Danzo growled as he stood up, flexing his crippled arm, causing the braces to fall off, revealing multiple eyes embedded into it, as well as some strange discoloration. "I see now," Danzo said, unsheathing his cane, a slightly unhinged tone in his voice. "I see that I can't control things from the shadows anymore. If I wish to have what is owed to me, then I will take it." Flashback end. Tsunade sighed to herself as she remembered the following fight. Danzo was much stronger than she originally believed. The man made incredible use of the implanted Sharingan eyes, which acted like a big middle finger to the deceased Uchiha clan. However, the fight didn't exactly go in his favor, having apparently underestimated how much the people would fight. In the end, Danzo lost a good amount of his forces, and was forced to retreat. He wound up using a few of his rude Anbu as meat shields to protect himself while he ran. Afterwards, the Anbu continued to fight until they were dead or captured. Immediately afterwards, Tsunade sent a new file towards the daimyo to add a new criminal to the bingo book, Danzo Shimura. He was a high S-ranked bounty with a kill-on-sight order. She also made sure to Danzo's crimes, thought she made sure to keep what knowledge he knew that could be used against them. She didn't want anyone taking the risk of Danzo taking over their village. Naruto wasn't officially put into the bingo book himself. However, it was considered an ongoing mission to bring Naruto back. It was considered a high A-ranked mission given his importance. If anyone were to ask, Tay would respond that Naruto was a person of interest in a high-profile case. To make things worse, nearly a day afterwards, Sasuke's transport to the blood prison was intercepted and attacked. She quickly dispatched a group of Anbu to deal with the problem. However, it seemed that I wasn't needed, as when they arrived, Sasuke was found tied up and ready to be imprisoned. Tsunade smirked as she remembered that part of her and Jiraiya's plan. During the drawing trip, Naruto had apparently mentioned how easy it was to steal the Forbidden Scroll. After that, he and Naruto came up with a special seal to be used on it, dubbed the Cerberus Lock Seal. The seal was a special lock, which could only be opened using the distinct chakra of 3 people. In the case of the scroll, the Hokage and her advisors. If someone tried to use their own chakra, it would turn against them, resulting in a crippling injury and letting out a loud siren-like sound. After Inoichi wiped all the ninja training, from advanced to academy lessons, from Sasuke's mind, Jiraiya applied a version of the seal that could only be opened by his, Inoichi's, and Tsunade's chakra. If someone tried to undo it, the seal would obliterate Sasuke's chakra network. Tsunade smiled to herself, wishing she could have seen the look on the cycloptic Warhawk's face when he found that all his manipulating for Sasuke's behalf had all but failed. Soon after, Sasuke was escorted to the blood prison where he was locked up. Even after all that, there was still some hard work after that. It took Jiraiya nearly a month to crack the seals that were on the root members' tongues, and it took Inoichi nearly 2 to crack through the mental conditioning, or as she called it, brainwashing, on the root members. After that, they group need to be assimilated into the village, which was rather difficult given how they were shut-ins and weren't very social adapted, but they were adapting quickly. With their brainwashing mostly undone, Danzo's bases were found and exposed. They found out about how Danzo had Itachi murder the Uchiha clan, and how he worked with Orochimaru. Tsunade had been furious when she found out that Danzo had transferred Sharingan eyes into his arms, but also cells from her grandfather. After that, Danzo's bounty almost doubled overnight. Tsunade sighed once again before looking out over her village. After the truth of Naruto's parentage came out, several of the civilians were expressing remorse for their actions. Though a few were upset that they had missed out a potential cash cow, the greedier ones anyway, but they made sure not to say such thoughts out loud. However, things got crazier when word of Naruto's burden spread out as well. The children who had mocked Naruto or listened to their parents to ostracize him, now looked at them with disdain for telling them something without getting all the facts. A lot of parents lost the respect of their kids that day. Other groups that were affected was the main Konoha shinobi. Kakashi had gone into a depression, by not only not recognizing his sensei's son, but because he had failed so epically. He had officially become an outcast among some of his fellow shinobi and had been demoted to chunin. And once he got his rank back, if he got it back, he was forbidden from teaching a team again. Shino and Shikamaru were both upset that they hadn't seen the relationship between the two sooner. Hinata became slightly depressed as he realized she could have done more when she was a child. It also hardened her reserve to come out of her shell more. The others now respected Naruto even more, realizing what he went through trying to keep the great beast at bay. However, out of all of them, the one who seemed to be taking things the hardest was Sakura. The Rosette had her entire world shattered after learning of Sasuke's true nature, and of Naruto's burden and how it affected him throughout his life. Sakura regretted every time she punched Naruto just for asking her out, and every time she called him an idiot. Her own self-image as the top kunoichi of the year had always prevented her from seeing how Naruto had grown stronger and more mature, if only just barely, over the years. Tsunade was pulled from her thoughts about the recent events by the sound of the window opening. Turning towards the noise, she saw the familiar sight of Jiraiya coming in through the window. "Can't you ever use the door, pervert?" she asked, with a raised eyebrow. Jiraiya smiled as he said, "And not be able to keep you on your toes, princess?" Tsunade smiled to herself, glad that Jiraiya could keep up his attempts to cheer her up. "So, any news from your spy network?" she asked. Jiraiya's smile quickly became serious as he said, "Well, first off, Sasuke had just recently become a member of solitary confinement in the blood prison. So, I guess we won't be hearing anything about that for a while." After Danzo's attempt to grab Sasuke from the prison transport, they decided it was best to keep an eye on the boy. Apparently, the harsh reality of prison and no chakra was not doing well for the boy. "Now, moving on to more important matters," Jiraiya said, "the Akatsuki organization hasn't moved in a while, since Naruto's disappearance. My guess is that they are waiting for a concrete location on the boy before they make their move on the rest of the Jinchuriki. My sources still haven't been able to confirm as to why they are after them, however." Tsunade nodded. A man fitting Danzo's description was reported being spotted near the Hidden Rain village, but it has yet to be confirmed if it is in fact him. Tsunade rubbed her chin in thought. What would Danzo want with the Hidden Rain village? Jiraiya's look took on a somber tone, and unfortunately, no one has seen hide nor hair of Naruto or the mysterious man who saved him from the retrieval team and the Akatsuki members. Tsunade sighed, dejectedly. It had been almost 5 months and there had been no sign of the orange-clad knucklehead anywhere. She was starting to wonder if he had been killed. Jiraiya, seeing her upset, walked over and gave her a small hug. "Don't worry, Tsunade," he said soothingly, "we'll find him." Tsunade simply sighed and leaned into the hug, after making sure Jiraiya's hands were staying in the appropriate zones of course. Meanwhile, in the Hidden Rain village, Danzo was starting to curse himself for not planning so far ahead if his plans had been discovered. After escaping his execution, he ran for it. However, his assets were frozen in the village and only a handful of his root Anbu came with him. His first act was to make sure Sasuke didn't get sent to jail, hoping to use the boy as a puppet. However, he quickly realized that was a mistake as Sasuke had his chakras sealed away and he couldn't undo it. If that wasn't enough, he had bounty hunters on his trail trying to collect the bounty put on his head. Because of these attacks, Danzo had lost his remaining soldiers and he couldn't risk going near the village to get more. Not to mention, the money he had saved in case he need to move from the village was running low. He couldn't risk going to the major villages, as they would no doubt be privy to his necessary actions back in Konoha. So, now he was in a village that would probably not know of his crimes. One that hadn't been a part of any alliances for a very long time. So now, Danzo stood before the cage of the Hidden Rain village. The orange-haired man, with piercings in his nose, and strange eyes looked at him, with a blank expression. "You wish for us to take you into the village?" Pain's Diva Path asked, as he looked at the man. Unknown to Danzo, the Akatsuki's own spy network had found out about Danzo's crimes and they had no doubt that he would try to play the master manipulator here. "Yes," Danzo answered. "I have knowledge that could be very useful to you." The Path looked at him for a moment and said, "I'm sorry, but I cannot allow an S-ranked criminal into my village. Or can I even begin to trust that one who is as manipulative as you to keep your word?" Danzo's visible eye narrowed. He activated the Sharingan eye behind his bandages to try and control the man. This proved to be a huge mistake. In puffs of smoke, the Preta and Naraka paths appeared. The Preta path grabbed Danzo's face, tearing off the bandages covering his stolen eye. The chakra was ripped from his eye, ending the potential genjutsu. The Naraka path then grabbed Danzo by the neck and hauled him into the air. Danzo found himself paralyzed. With a simple thought, the Naraka path performed a summoning, bringing out a large pale head with bizarre eyes and surrounded by dark purple flames. The head opened its mouth and a tendril shot out, connecting with Danzo's back. Danzo's eyes, real and implanted, became blank. Now then, the Diva path said, "Tell us everything that you know." Danzo proceeded to spill his guts about everything. How many he had, his money, his contact with Orochimaru, even the specialized dead man sealed to the hat on his chest. Thanks to the Naraka path, nothing was kept secret. With that done, the Diva path grew a black rod from his hand and proceeded to swing, severing Danzo's head from his body. The Preta path then proceeded to drain every drop of chakra from the man, preventing the use of the powerful seal he had on his chest. "Pain-sama," a voice said. Everyone turned to see Zetsu standing on the windowsill. "I sensed something strange. What has, oh?" The plant man calmed down upon seeing the dead form of Danzo. Then he cocked his head to the side and asked, "Who is that?" The extension of Nagato's will answered, "Just a fool thinking he could manipulate a god. You may consume him if you want." If Pain wasn't so good at hiding his emotions, he would have ripped Danzo apart. As it turns out, he had helped Hanzo the Salamander years ago during the Shinobi War and had been perfectly fine with ruining the lives of several people. If he wasn't so good at hiding his emotions, he would have destroyed the man on the spot, with not even ashes being left. However, he felt more content to see man who thought himself untouchable being used as food for Zetsu. The plant man got down from the window and walked over. He sniffed a bit and said, "Nah, too old. He'll be too chewy. Plus, insanity leaves a terrible aftertaste." The paths had to suppress a shudder as the plant man said this. "Throw the body away then," the Diva path said. "I do not wish to dirty my office with such filth longer than necessary." Zetsu leaned down and examined the body for a moment. Suddenly, a disturbing grin spread across the man's face. "Well, the white half of it anyway." "I think I might have an idea for that," Zetsu said, gaining the attention of the paths.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.